David, are we ready to go over there? We're online? Okay. Thank you. Welcome to the Select Water Committee. It's good to have you here. We recognize our staff, David and Kaylee, who's helping us with legal matters and keeping us online. We also have several members of the Wyoming Water Development Commission with us today, and we welcome them as well as our staff members from the Water Development Commission office and others in the audience. Will meet you and introduce you as you come on board. We welcome everyone here. We're looking at our monitor and we have two, let's see. Senator Larson, you're still a representative today. So we have two representatives and a senator online. And so I believe we have a quorum. So David, would you read the roll call, please?
Senator Boner? Here. Senator Driscoll? Senator French?
Here.
Senator Guru? Senator Steinmetz? Here. Representative Banks? Representative Eklund?
Here.
Representative Larson?
Here.
Representative Nyman? Representative Paxton?
Here.
Chairman Simpson?
Here.
Vice Chairman Hicks?
Here.
Thank you, Kaylee. That constitutes a quorum, and we anticipate more will be joining us shortly, so we'll get started. I hope you're enjoying your holiday season, folks. Glad to have you join us in our last interim committee meeting of the Select Water Committee. Our intentions is to continue to plunk through our agenda today and work right through lunch. Unless we start seeing people faint, we're going to keep on working until we get our agenda through today. And so with that, I believe we're ready to start with agenda item number 2. Interim Director Mead, welcome to our meeting. You got a couple items you would like to address with us?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to hand it over to Bill Brewer, our Deputy Director of Construction. We just wanted to bring to your attention a project that has requested sponsor contingency funds. And that project is the Goshen Irrigation District 29.4 pipeline. And the Water Development Commission took action on that yesterday, but we wanted to make you aware of the situation.
Thank you, Chairman. So the Goshen Irrigation District 29.4 pipeline project bid earlier this month, and bids came in considerably above engineers' prediction. This is a materials-only project, so all we are participating in is the invoiced cost of the materials for the pipeline and some of the appurtenances needed to install that pipeline. This project was reviewed last September as part of our application, and at that time the staff understood that pipeline prices were coming in at that time higher than normal. However, at the time we were under the belief that those prices would come back down by the time this project bid, so we did not overly inflate the original project request. We looked at 2019 prices and inflated them for what we believed would be reasonable prices in 2022. However, the prices still came in about 40% higher than those prices. Our PVC prices of this size pipe, this is a 30-inch PVC pipeline. We are seeing better prices than we were seeing last fall and last spring. However, we are not back to where we were, and I'm starting to wonder whether we will get back to where we were before. But in this case, the existing budget for the project was $290,000 to purchase the pipeline materials. We received 3 bids for the materials. They were all very competitive with each other, within a few percent of each other. So I believe we received 3 good bids for this project. However, we are now looking at a total budget of around $405,000 to buy the materials for this pipeline project. So the request was to receive $115,000 from Sponsors Contingency Fund to make up the difference in the material costs. The district will make up their additional costs because they also have additional costs to install the pipeline. However, they are in agreement that they can make up those additional costs and any additional costs that do come out of materials. So the request was for $115,000 from the Sponsors Contingency Fund, and the commission approved that recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Brewer. So committee, this, as you recall, we appropriate a small amount of money each year that goes into a contingency for this very application. And this is a relatively small amount, which is what we like. We're large project overruns, we like to come back through us, but this is very well within the range that we view, and the commission has recommended approval. Do we have a motion on the floor to approve this action? Senator Steinmetz moved. It's been moved and seconded to proceed with allocating an additional $115,000 for the Goshen Irrigation District 29.4 pipeline project. Any discussion? I want to make sure, could I do a sound check? Representative Larson, could you turn your mic on? Can you hear us okay?
I can hear you. Thank you. Yes.
Very good. All right. Because we have members that are zooming in, and it's really difficult to do a voice vote with members outside, we're going to do a hand or raise your arm vote all day today on all of our matters so that we can count the arms, yes and no. So all in favor of the motion, please indicate by raising your hand. Any opposed? Thank you. Motion passes. Senator Driscoll, we welcome you to our committee. Good to have you join us. And congratulations on your selection as the president of the Senate. It'll be a great honor for you.
Thank you.
Interim Director Mead, do you have another item for us?
Mr. Chairman, I do. So we're going to ask the Director of the Office of Water Programs with UW to come up. He's going to briefly review the Office of Water Research Program proposals that were considered by the Advisory Committee and the rankings that came out of that for your consideration.
Welcome. Mr. Kerr, glad to have you join us.
Chairman, yes, I'm Greg Kerr. I'm the Director of the Office of Water Programs at the University of Wyoming, and my office administers the Water Research Program. So happy to be here today to kind of inform you about projects.
May I make an introductory comment before you begin your presentation? Greg, folks, sometimes we don't understand what Greg is bringing to us. So I think it's important, particularly for those in the audience and those people listening in, to understand. So as a water influencing body, we often wonder about what's going on out in the world of water issues, and can we use the expertise from the University of Wyoming to gather greater insight. And so this little program we're entertaining today has been going on for many years, and we invite them to solicit proposals by their professors and graduate students to study a range of areas or topics that could be very interesting for us as water users in the state of Wyoming. And so they go through a selection process, and they bring to us a series of proposals that we could entertain. So as Mr. Kerr proceeds with describing what possibilities are in front of us for studying, I'd like for you to be asking yourself, is this relevant to us, and are the results of the studies going to be pertinent and useful for us as water users in the state of Wyoming. So that's why this is a little bit of a unique program. We're not after projects out on the ground installing pipelines, but rather really intellectual knowledge that can come out of the University of Wyoming. So with that, Director Kerr, please proceed.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I might add one additional comment to what you've said, and that is one of the important issues that we have is the training of students at the University of Wyoming. And for those students to participate in all of these research projects and then take their education and be able to apply it, hopefully within the state of Wyoming, to resolve a lot of water issues within the state. So just wanted to add that. Thank you. So in our last meeting in November in Casper, presented 4 water research proposals to you, and we were in the middle of our review process for those. And in that review process, we solicit peer reviews for all of the research proposals that are submitted to the Water Research Program. Those reviews are then given to our advisory committee. We have an 8-member advisory committee that's a very diverse committee made up of various state and federal private entities. I'd like to just give you an idea of what that particular advisory committee is composed of. The Wyoming Game and Fish has a representative on our committee, the State Engineer's Office, the Department of Agriculture, the United States Geological Survey, which encompasses their Wyoming, Montana Water Science Center, is a representative. The Wyoming Water Development Office, of course, the Association of Conservation Districts, the State Geological Survey, and the Wyoming DEQ composes our advisory committee. So this advisory committee takes into consideration all of the peer reviews that are solicited. They then, we meet, last month we met, and they have an in-depth discussion of all of the proposals and all of the peer reviews. And from those discussions, they then vote to rank the 4 proposals that we received this year and give comments on why they felt the ranking of these proposals were deserved. So that's where we are now, and what I presented to you are the 4 proposals. First of all, our proposal A, evaluating toxicity of harmful cyanobacterial blooms in Wyoming lakes and reservoirs. This particular principal investigator was funded in fiscal year 20. And that project looked at identifying, predicting, and managing the occurrence of harmful cyanobacterial blooms in Wyoming reservoirs. That fiscal year 20 project has been completed. They evaluated whether field sampling matched with remote sensing estimates of blooms. I looked at examining long-term productivity trends to see whether blooms are likely increasing in different water bodies, and they examined bloom species composition. As a side note, this particular project and the graduate student that worked on this project graduated, accepted a position with Wyoming DEQ, is currently working with DEQ, and next week, I believe you'll get a notice of it, if you already haven't, that this particular individual will be presenting the results of that project at Water Forum next week, and you can view that online if you'd like. I understand she gives a very good presentation and very good results from their project, so as a sidelight. The new project does not look at identifying the blooms. The work described under this proposal will expand on that project and the previous results and generate information to look at which lakes and reservoirs are most likely to have high toxin loads during blooms, which methods and what sampling frequency are needed to understand the toxin presence, and look at relationship between nutrient inputs, water temperature, bloom formation, and toxin production. This particular proposal worked with various state agencies and particularly with DEQ. If a lot of you recall this last summer, all of the warnings that DEQ put out for toxins and algal blooms in the state of Wyoming in different water bodies. So they're working very closely with DEQ on this particular proposal. This proposal came in ranked number 1 by the committee as the top proposal. Our proposal B, high-resolution upland and riverbank erosion monitoring to inform best management practices that seek to reduce sediment accumulation at the Willwood Dam. As many of you recall, the Willwood Dam has been a topic of concern for several years now with the sediment problems at Willwood. The goal of this proposal, which built on a proposal that it looked at last year, they came back with the proposal, visited with the various working groups, and revised some of their objectives. So this proposal is to increase the understanding of the sediment load sources within selected high-priority contributing areas that will in turn aid local, state, and federal agencies in implementing best management practices to reduce sediment accumulation at the Willwood Dam. They strive to derive erosion rates and land use, land cover products from very high resolution, in essence, drones equipped with LIDAR and multispectral data sets. They want to analyze the erosion rates to determine erosivity for varying vegetation types, densities, slopes, land use, and anthropogenic natural resources. And they want to provide recommendations and technology transfer to end users so they can best derive and implement proper best management practices for sediment load reduction. This particular proposal had support letters, 3 support letters, one from the 9H Research Foundation, one from the Powell-Clarks Fork Conservation District, and one from the Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality, Water Quality Division. This particular proposal was ranked 2nd overall by our committee. So, Proposal C, do beaver dam analogs reduce E. coli loading in surface water? The goal of this proposal was to test if BDAs or beaver dam analogs reduce pathogen or E. coli loading in streams. When E. coli is present, they assess the ability of BDAs to reduce E. coli loading in surface water, and they assess if BDA effectiveness in reducing E. coli occurrence and leading in surface water increases with BDA age. This particular proposal, some of the comments are also listed in your recommendation sheet from the advisory committee. This particular issue had several variables, numerous variables, and it was felt by the committee that they didn't know if this project and the way it was written, this proposal would be able to address many of those underlying concerns of the various variables that are involved with BDAs. So this particular proposal was ranked number 3 out of the 4 proposals. Proposal D, seasonal water supply forecast based on non-Gaussian information metric for the Wyoming watersheds. Highly technical proposal, to tell you the truth. And the peer reviews, it's hard to find peer reviews that understood a lot of the equations in the proposal. However, this particular proposal was to look at improved seasonal and subseasonal water supply predictions by incorporating effects associated with the modes of low frequency variability, earth oscillations, such as the Pacific North American pattern and the El Nino Southern Oscillation. It also incorporated the non-Gaussian and non-linear effects of the snow processes into the existing seasonal and sub-seasonal water supply forecasting in Wyoming basins. Again, this proposal was highly technical. The committee, they wondered if this would actually look more at basic research rather than applied. Don't believe this particular investigator talked with NRCS or conservation districts, state engineer's office to determine if the viability of this project right now as far as being applied and if they would be interested in it. Those are some of the projects. This project then was ranked number 4 out of all 4 projects. So those are the entire ranking list from the committee presented to you. I believe in the recommendation, the commission recommended the top 2 projects that were presented, and that total budget was $442,820 if you follow that recommendation and follow on.
Thank you, Director Kerr. Let's direct some questions to Director Kerr, and then I'd like to go to public input, and then we'll come back and debate a proposed motion. Any questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Vice Chair Hicks.
Director Kerr, I don't have any specific questions of the project proposal, but as you were going through the advisory committee members on there, and I was just curious, and I don't know that we've ever discussed this before, but it seems like it would facilitate if this process moved forward to maybe have a liaison from the commission and also the select water committee on that advisory oversight and selection board early in the process. What's your thoughts on that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, I certainly don't see any problem with that. In the past, that has been brought up, and time constraints were one thing in looking at putting on someone from the commission or select water. But, I mean, we're certainly open to that, but there are, you know, certain time constraints with people's schedules but.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm not volunteering for the job.
You're not?
I am not. I'm just thinking if there was an opportunity, you know, an extension of an invitation, if there was a member of either the commission or the committee that had the time and the desire to do that, I think it would be a benefit to have that early input from both of those entities, but just a thought.
Interim Director Mead, the funds that we would dedicate toward these studies comes out of which account?
Mr. Chairman, that's account 1.
Account
And
one.
we have, with all of our recommendations and the bills, there's roughly just a hair under $700,000 left in account 1.
Before or after this recommendation?
To implement the recommendation would require about $40,000 more than what we had kind of earmarked in there. So we should have more than enough. There'd still be $650,000 in account 1.
Oh, okay.
With
So
these.
it's after
Yeah,
the budget of $400,000. Okay.
yeah. The additional
good.
42,000 would be, we could cover that.
Okay. Any questions? All right. I'd like to open it up for the public. Is there anyone that would like to propose or throw your weight behind one of these 4 proposals? Please come forward. Would you introduce yourself for the record, please?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Richard Garrett, and as a bit of background, I served on a task force on the Willwood Dam issue in a capacity that I held with the Nature Conservancy a few years ago. Obviously, that's an important project, and counts for a lot in that community. And downstream issues as well. As you all might recall, a release of sediment from the dam several years ago resulted in the degradation of the fishery downstream. And any study that we can undertake to improve outcomes is of great benefit. I'd also add too that beaver dam analogs are an important research initiative, I think, that has undergone a lot of work in the state. Again, the Nature Conservancy undertook some of that work. It would be interesting to see how beaver dam analogs can play into assisting our efforts in remediating the Willwood Dam issues. So with that, Mr. Chairman, be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Garrett. Anyone?
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other public input? All right, we'll proceed. So, committee members, the Water Development Commission has recommended to us that we approve the first and the second ranked projects from the review committee. Do I hear a motion? So moved. Do I hear?
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second to approve the first two ranked studies from the University of Wyoming. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed with the vote. All in favor of that motion, please indicate by the raise of the right hand. Any opposed? Thank you. Voting is unanimous. Very good. Thank you, Director Kerr.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Okay, we are now on item number 3, the omnibus water bill. Committee members, one of the most important tasks we do as this committee is to oversee the Water Development Office and their efforts to bring and advance water improvement projects throughout the state. And each year at this time, we entertain 2 bills. One bill is for the planning projects, and the second bill is for all the construction projects. And so we have Interim Director Mead is going to walk us through the planning bill first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just a quick reminder of the process we've gone through to date. The applications for these studies were received back in March 1. And then our office, project managers, commissioners were invited along to go look at those different projects, what the needs were from the sponsors. From that, we put together our recommendations and presented those to the commission and the Select Water Committee at our May meeting. At that time, you approved those studies, and then we went through the consultant selection process that culminated in October with actual hard budget numbers through that competitive consultant selection process. Those were plugged into the recommendations from May, and then they were presented to you again at the November meeting. So everything's been vetted pretty well, but if you have questions, feel free to stop me and ask. I would say that we've got a handout or 2 handouts. The first one is for the planning bill, 11 by 17 sheet, and I hope those folks online receive that via an email. So if you grab the one at the top that says Omnibus Water Bill Planning, this may help a little bit. And I'll go through that. So the second column, as you'll see, is the bill page number for each project that's located in the bill. And as you look down through there, this is kind of in, I guess, for lack of better terms, chronological order of the bill. And then we have the project name, the location. About the 5th column over, we have the funding amount, recommendation, and which account that's coming from. And then a short description, whether it's a master plan, feasibility study, and then in that far right column of notes, you'll see we have the different section numbers associated with those projects. And as you can see, it just follows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, et cetera. So in total, the omnibus bill is 12 pages long. It's the introduction followed by 9 sections. And just real quickly, again, looking at that summary table. Section 1 is our account 1 or new development projects, level 1 projects, reconnaissance type studies. Section 2 is our, again, account 1 new development, level 2 feasibility studies. Section 3 is our account 2 rehabilitation, level 1 studies. Section 4 is our account 2 feasibility studies, or level 2. And then we get into some of the different items. If you recall, so section 5 is the Green River, Little Snake River Basin's conveyance loss study that we discussed back in November. And then section 6 are amendments to existing or previous studies. Section 7 is, well, I should say, step back for just a second. The section 6 is an amendment to level 2 studies, and I believe that's account 1. Section 7 is amendments to level 2 studies out of account 3. That's the Levitt project, and we'll get into these more in detail here in just a second. And then section 8 just is the transfer from the general fund to account 1 for that conveyance loss study to cover the cost of that. And then the 9th section is just providing an effective date for the bill. So as I walk through the bill, so I'd refer you to page 1
Director
of the
May,
omnibus planning bill. Yeah.
may I interrupt you? For members of the House, it's really important you take very good notes. For the last 4 years, I've had the privilege of presenting these bills on the floor, but the memo is that I'm retiring and I won't be here this year. So one of you, Speaker Summers has joined us. One of you will have to carry this on the floor. So I encourage all of you to take really, really good notes because it might be you. So please proceed.
And Mr. Chairman, I would like to add, before the session starts, we'll provide to the Select Water Committee and the Ag Committees what we call a blue book for both the planning bill and the construction bill. And it'll, on the front cover of that blue book, we'll have a table similar to what I handed out. So you'll be able to quickly get to a bill page and know where projects are located. And then we also have in that blue book, not only the bill itself, but all the recommendations from back in November associated, and you'll be able to quickly get to them with kind of a table of contents in case any questions come up on the floor or in the committees. We'll be there to help out, but we will be providing that. So you'll have a big set of notes in that manner. Okay, so I'll try to go through quickly, but in a manner that you can follow along. So I'll be throwing out a lot of page numbers and line numbers. So if that gets to be too much, you can tell me to stop and do it a different way if you prefer. So on page 1 of the omnibus water bill planning, the first section there is just the introduction. And this gives the general what's in the bill. So just to paraphrase, we're authorizing specified level 1 and 2 studies, providing for appropriations, requiring reports, providing for reversion dates of unexpended funds, authorizing unobligated funds to be used to complete other designated projects, and I'll talk about that more in a second. Extending reversion dates and study dates, which are the planning amendments that I briefly mentioned on the summary table, and then providing for an effective date. Now I'll have you switch over to page 2, line 1. And if any point in time you want me to stop and have more discussion, please stop me. So on page 2, line 1, this is where we have our level 1 reconnaissance studies for the new development. So again, count 1, level 1. I'll walk through this first one just to give you a better example in a little bit more detail than I will the rest because they're very similar. So again, I'll paraphrase what's under that section 1 heading. So the following sums of money are appropriated to account 1. It provides the statute number that sets up account 1. Those funds are appropriated to the commission. You go down a little bit further, you start on line 6, about halfway through that line. Funds appropriated under this section for a particular project that are in excess of the actual money necessary to complete the study may, subject to the review and recommendation of the Select Water Committee, be expended by the commission to complete reconnaissance study for any other project listed in that section. And then we get into any not not expended or obligated prior to July 26th. That provides a reversion date for project funding. And then we have to provide a report to the legislature prior to 2025, and we take care of that with our legislative reports every year. So then we get down to line 18, 19, 20, et cetera, on page 2, and that's where we actually have our projects listed for account 1, level 1s. So we've got our 5 master plans that we've discussed previously. With the UW Water Research Program, of course, we were waiting for yesterday and today to come to a determination on which project proposals were going to be acceptable. So with that additional to fill in for that TBD, the UW Water Research Program would be $442,820. That would bring the total for account 1, level 1 to $1,346,820. Moving on to page 3, line 1. This is our level 2 feasibility studies for account 1. The language under that section is basically the same as section 1, so I won't go through that again. Again, we go down to line 18 on page 3. This is where we start our listing of projects, actually down on line 20, 21, 22, et cetera. We've got 2 feasibility studies with the Central Wyoming Regional Water System Wellfield Study and the Green River Rock Springs Sweetwater County Joint Powers Water Board East Side Zone 2 study for a total of $1,795,000.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Eklund.
may we back up a bit? I wasn't writing quick enough, so back to what the grand total was with the addition of what we had on the water research.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. So the total for, on page 2, section 1 would be $1,346,820.
Thank you.
Do you need the number for the UW Water Research
No.
Program? Okay,
No, I had that one down.
all right. So moving on to section 3, which is on page 4, line 2. Now we're getting into our account 2 rehabilitation level 1 studies. So the language below that, section 3, is exactly the same, except for we're talking about the following sums of money are appropriated from account 2. Therefore, the Wyoming statute is slightly different, 41.2.124A2I. And any funds that would revert would go to account 2 rather than account 1. So that's the only difference in that description of section 3. And we go down to line 21 of page 4. This is where we have our projects listed for this section. We have our 4 master plans. That spills on to page 5. And on page 5, line 4, we have the total for our account 2 rehabilitation level 1 studies in the amount of $960,000. Move on to section 4, starting on page 5, line 6. These are our level 2 studies under account 2 rehabilitation. Again, language is the same under that section 4. I'll actually refer you over to page 6 where we have the list of projects right at the top. We have our 5 feasibility studies, and on line 11 is where our grand total for that is, and that's $1,633,000. So that's the end of the planning bill of the new studies, and now we'll get into the amendments. Well, other items and amendments. So on line 13, page 6, this is where we are appropriating $500,000 from account 1 to the commission for the Green River, Little Snake River Basin's conveyance loss study. And that appropriation will be contingent upon the transfer of funds to Water Development Account 1 as described in section 8. And we'll jump to section 8 here in just a second. And then any unexpended, unobligated funds shall revert to the general fund as provided by law on July 26th or July 1st, 2026. So if we would jump over real quick to page 11, line 21. This is section 8. And as it states, the state auditor shall transfer $500,000 from the general fund to Water Development Account 1. Any questions on that one? Okay. take you
Director?
back to section 6, which is,
Director?
yes.
Committee members, this is a little bit unusual. Pay attention to that. We're requesting general fund money come over into the water development account for the purpose of this, the Green River, Little Snake River Basin Conveyance Law Study. So what we're doing is we're saying that is a very important study for the entire state of Wyoming. And rather than taking money out of our own accounts, we're asking the legislature to pull it out of the general fund. So be aware of that. There may be some debate down the road of why didn't we just use our own funds versus reaching to the general account? So we need to be prepared to argue that. Please.
And Mr. Chairman, I just make one comment associated with that. If that debate occurs, then recall what the existing balance is in account 1, roughly 650,000 after the UW water research. So we don't have a lot left in account 1 or account 2 for that matter.
Thank you.
So back on page 6, line 25. This is section 6, and this is actually the first amendment. And this is for the Douglas Test Well Level 2 study. So as you guys are all probably aware, in there we are basically going back to previous legislation. So this is 2017 session law, chapter section, and we amend that to then amend both for time and funding. So going on to page 7, the original bill or session law in 2017 had 6 studies in this particular section for level 2 feasibility studies, new development. So what the amendment does is it breaks those 5 studies apart to have the original reversion date, and then the 6th study, which is the Douglas Test Well, we separate out so we can provide it a different reversion date. And that's when you get down onto line 18 of page 7. That's really what we're starting here. The sums of money appropriated to the following studies, not obligated prior to July 1 of 2020 shall revert. And then you move over to page 8, starting on line 4. Those are the other 5 original studies, which would have that original reversion date. Then you get down to line 17 of page 8. Similar language, the sums of money appropriated to the following studies, not obligated prior to July 1 of 2026 shall revert. And then you move on to page 9, line
Director?
2.
Sorry, I want to make sure we're clear on that, folks. So at the top of page 8, we have 5 projects that are listed. We're not touching those. Those are leftovers from 2017. We're only starting a new paragraph on C, and that's really setting the stage for the Douglas project that's found on page 9.
Yep.
Clear? Okay, proceed.
Okay, and then you move down to the table starting on line 8 of page 9. And this is where we show the appropriations. So as you see for the Douglas Test Well, the new dollar amount goes from $1,205,000 to $1,655,000 to effectuate the $450,000 addition. And then you go down to lines 20 and 21, and that breaks out the original 2017 appropriation and then the 2023 appropriation of the $450,000. Okay, then moving on to the next amendment. It's under section 7, which is just down on line 23 of page 9. This is 2021 Wyoming session law. And this one's in a little bit different format because we are amending a previous amendment. So I think what I'll have you do is jump over to page 10. And in that original appropriation, there was let's see, 3 studies. Clear Creek Storage Study, the Nowood River Storage Alkali Creek Project, which is what we're amending within this bill. And then the Shell Valley Storage Project. I'm sorry, yeah, the Shell Valley Levitt Reservoir. So there were 3 projects. I believe last year we amended the Clear Creek and the Nowood. So again, we're amending the Nowood once more. So down on page 10, line 15, This is where we get into the extension for the Norwood River Storage Alkali Creek project. And then that new reversion date is on lines 18 and 19, July 1st of 2025. Then we move over to page 11, and just as we did on the previous amendment, starting on line 9 of page 11, you see the table of funds. The Alkali Creek project would go from $4 million to $4,420,000. And then as you get down through line 16, 17, 18, 19, that shows the different appropriations per session. So 2018 and 21 were just time extensions. And then here in 2023, that shows the new $420,000 for the storage study or for the Alkali Creek project. Are there any questions on that one?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Vice Chair Hicks?
Yeah, Director, remind me why when we're in alkali and it's already in a construction phase or we're bidding a construction phase, are we going back and increasing the appropriation for a level 2 feasibility study where it's already in the dams and reservoirs out of account 3?
Mr. Chairman, in dams and reservoirs, we have 3 phases in level 2. Phase 1 is more or less an alternatives analysis. Phase 2 is where we go out and do a lot of the field investigations for a particular site that was the best one out of the alternatives analysis. And then phase 3 of that level 2 feasibility study is the permitting and the design. So it's a little different than the rest of our program, just because there's so much that goes into NEPA and everything else. You may be thinking a little bit more about Levitt Reservoir, and that's the one that we have actually gone out to bid on and had bids come in pretty high. Alkali Creek is about a year behind Levitt, so we are into design, not complete with design. And what has occurred over the years is we've had landowner turnover, and so a lot of the discussions on easements, mainly easements, the land acquisition is taken care of, but the easements have been a little difficult to deal with in bringing new landowners up to speed that have moved in. And then we're also looking at federal funding opportunities and applying for those. And depending on which federal funding opportunities come or are fruitful, it may require some design changes. And we're about, I would say, probably at 30% design right now. So we've got a little bit more design to complete.
Couldn't that, Mr. Chairman, just to follow up, couldn't that be funded out of account 3 though, as part of that where we have a higher balance? And what is the balance in account 3 right now?
And Mr. Chairman, this is all funded out of account 3.
This is 3, so this is
Yes.
level 2 out of account 3.
That's correct.
All right, okay, that's the clarification I need.
Sorry, I wasn't
All right.
clear. Okay, so moving forward, section 8 is on page 11, line 21. Again, we just went over this a minute ago. That was the state auditor shall transfer $500,000 from the general fund to account 1. And again, that's for the conveyance loss study in section 5, I believe. And then the last section of the planning bill on line 26 of page 11 is section 9, and that just provides for the effective date, which is immediate upon becoming law.
Thank you, Jason. Nice job. You should be a legislator someday. I know that would be a serious decrease in pay for you to jump for your full-time job. Very good.
Mr.
Okay,
Chairman,
folks.
just as an observation, and I'm sure you would appreciate this, given his engineering background, I'm sure he's smarter than that.
Folks, is there any questions for Director Mead? Very good. I'm going to open it up for public comment period before we dive into the bill and have a motion. So is there anyone in the public that would like to speak toward the omnibus planning bill? Seeing none, let's proceed then. Members of the committee, I'm looking for a motion.
Move the bill.
It's been moved and seconded to advance the bill and be able to discuss it. So the floor is now open for debate on the bills.
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
I would like to offer a couple of amendments to the planning bill. And for the committee, I did bring these yesterday and presented these to the commission, and we had some discussions, so the commission was able to at least participate in that discussion and the nature of this. But Mr. Chairman, what I'd like to do is when we go to into the level 1 studies on page 4, under section 3, one of the things I would like the committee to consider is an amendment to look at including an appropriation of $250,000 to update the Rollins master plan. So let me explain why this is coming to Select Water. And so, as I think the director indicated earlier, applications for these are in March. March of this year, City of Rollins had a catastrophic failure on their main supply line to their water treatment facilities. And so, quite frankly, they weren't in a position to be filling out applications at the time. And then subsequent to that, they still could have come before the commission. But they lost their city planner, city engineer, and so they had no staff. And so as a result of the timing of the failure and then the loss of staff and then the delay in the time of being able, I think everybody understands the difficulty of hiring staff nowadays, just the time constraints, they weren't able to get anything to the Water Development Commission, but they have requested that we would consider updating they have a 2010 master plan. Many of the problems that were indicated, or some of the issues that were indicated in that plan were incorporated, but there's also a lot of new technologies. One of the things they're struggling with right now is just the technologies of upgrading all of their infrastructure. Not only did they have the failure, then when they were able to bring that back on, then they had a number of sensors and gauges that failed on the storage system that failed, and then another break on the main steel line that broke. So at this point in time, members, what I'd like to do is offer an amendment to the planning bill to include an updated Rollins master plan for $250,000. And Mr. Chairman, I would stand for any questions.
Thank you, Senator. Do I hear a second to that amendment? Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we add on page 4 or the top of page 5, Rollins Master Plan Project located in Carbon County with a total of $250,000,
Mr.
which would
Chairman,
also,
if I could just add something real quick.
go ahead,
It may
Rick.
be more appropriate to put that under section 1 with all the other master plans.
Section 1, not on,
Page 2.
I'm sorry, thank you.
Okay.
Very good. So the amendment is to add the Rollins Master Plan on page 2, located in Carbon County for the total of $250,000. Senator Hicks, may I ask where you came up with the $250,000?
That wasn't my number. I had asked the staff to go and review that and what they thought it was going to cost to go ahead and update that master plan. So that was worked out by the staff.
So Director Mead, you feel good about that? Because you don't have you're gonna have to go through the selection process and everything a little bit out of sync from the rest of the projects, but you feel comfortable with that number?
Mr. Chairman, yes, we do. Okay.
Any discussion? Please, Senator Bona.
Just a clarifying question, Mr. Chairman, is that out of account 1 then, the motion?
New development is account 1, correct?
Okay, just make sure that's part of the motion.
So
Any
that
other
just took
discussion?
account 1, Mr. Chairman, from 650,000 down to 400,000.
That's a better number for us to support the 500.
And Mr. Chairman, I would add account 2 only has about 125,000 in it, so there wouldn't be enough in account 2 anyway, after all these recommendations.
Very good. Any members online would like to comment? Seeing none, let's vote. All in favor of adding the Rollins Master Plan to the Level 1 Reconnaissance Studies, new development. Please indicate by the raise of the right hand. Any opposed? Voting is unanimous. Okay, and so we need to change the total on that. It's no longer 1.3 million. We'll need to adjust that. Could
Mr.
President
Chairman,
call
that
for me?
number would be $1,596,820.
Again, please.
$1,596,820.
20. That's the new number at the bottom of page 2. Thank you. Any other amendments? Any other discussions on the bill?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to offer another amendment, and this amendment will be to add another FTE position to the Water Development Office and also provide an appropriation for supporting consulting services for this position. It would be a request of a general fund, so what I would take you to is if you go to page section 8, I believe this is where we would want to insert this. Again, this relates to Green River, Upper Colorado River Basin, but I'd like to give you just a little bit of background. I think anybody in the water world knows that the Colorado River is in dire shape, and it's part of the Upper Colorado River Basin and part of the Upper Colorado River Compact, which is the states of New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming. It looks like the reservoir is actually dropping faster than we thought. And so some of the latest projections is we could start to have power disruptions by 2024 at Lake Powell. And so as a consequence of that, there is a lot of information that's been going on. Give you an idea of where our other states in the upper basin are at. So last year, the state of Utah put $500 million into their Water Resources Department. We got an update from the UCRC Monday, which is the Upper Colorado River Commission. Colorado has just put $6.9 million into their Colorado River account to start working on this. Many of these are looking at a number of positions and stuff. I think what we're going to try to do here is actually capture some opportunities to get ahead of the game. So the nature of what we're dealing with is the governor's established the Colorado River Working Group that's got legislative members, all of the industry, heavy industry. We've got Trona, thermal power generation, municipalities, and agriculture that sit on that working group, and we had this discussion. We've also got NGO representation on there. We had a discussion Monday and got an update from the UCRC. There's a number of programs that are being rolled out as part of these federal acts. There'll be about $500 million coming through Bureau of Reclamation to the upper basin states to start looking at system pilot conservation programs. They're also soliciting other type of voluntary water conservation programs. I won't go into in-depth in that. What this position would do is I'll just kind of give you a brief description of what we're looking at. This would be the Wyoming Upper Colorado River Basin Water Project Program Coordinator. The position would serve as the principal representative to the agency to public elected officials and government agencies and matters concerning federal funding that become available for water conservation projects within the Green River Basin. It identify available federal funding opportunities, federal program criteria, requirements, monitoring studies, data collection, preparation of grants, and secure federal funding. And so this is kind of an overarching project development coordinator position. Not only are we have the dollars coming through the UCRC for the System Conservation Pilot Project, there's other federal funding out there through the Farm Bill programs. They've designated the Colorado River Basin as a priority program within the United States. They have set up a program called Regional Conservation Pilot Programs. Colorado River is eligible for that. We have large opportunity monies to pursue water smart grants. So what we're looking at is trying to put a position in water development, assuming that we can find one that has the technical ability to be able to carry out the duties, would be to go out there and basically serve as a project manager coordinator and try to go after a lot of these federal dollars that are out there. Talked about the 500 million that's coming to UCRC. Some of that's going to come to System Conservation Pilot Project. Obviously, not all that's coming to Wyoming, but we need to be competitive in this process. Water Smart grants for the Bureau of Reclamation. We have a number of non-governmental organizations that have been able to secure in the past significantly large amounts of money to work within the Green River Basin. Both Trout Unlimited and Nature Conservancy have been successful in receiving funding to help do water conservation projects. So we took this to the working group Monday. There was support to go ahead and move forward with this. And so at this point in time, Mr. Chairman, what I'd like to do is stand for any questions, but what we're asking for is an FTE in water development, full-time employee. It would be this project coordinator, and then and that's $125,000 for salary and benefits. And then we would look at an additional $500,000 appropriation that would supply all the additional consulting services, the necessary infrastructure and support services to get these programs stood up and run. This would be a general fund appropriation, just like we did for the conveyance loss study as part of the Colorado River Basin program. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd stand for any questions.
Thank you, Senator Hicks. Our legal counsel has suggested we actually create a new section. Section 9 would be inserted right after Section 8. So Senator Hicks, you mentioned 125K for salary and benefits. Wouldn't we want to double that for a biennial? Or do you think just 1 year's salary?
I believe the way that that would work is that would go into the water development's authorizations to go up for an additional 1 FTE. And so I think we would want to say that it would be carried forward in their next budget, right?
Gotcha.
And then designate that as general fund.
That makes sense because next year is the budget year, and
Correct.
so we'd slide into it. Okay. I thought, now, Senator, do you have any proposed verbiage for this new paragraph or?
You know, I've got some draft stuff here that I can give staff, but it's pretty much what I read out on that draft. So I can give that to staff and we can have that drafted up. And then that's what, I mean, that would be the proposed.
So the essence of your proposed amendment is that we add a full-time FTE to Water Development Commission staff dedicated toward the Green River Basin. And then also
Upper Colorado River.
Upper Colorado, pardon me. And then did you say an additional 500,000?
And that would be a one-time appropriation.
One-time appropriation. David, do you have that? Are you clear on what the direction is there? Committee, are the rest of you clear on what the proposed amendment is?
Mr. Chairman, so the actual dollar amount proposes another 500,000 for the FTE position as well as the conveyance loss, or is it that
The
combined?
FTE would be another 125,000. So the total appropriation would be $625,000.
Right.
The FTE position would be carried forward as part of the standard budget by Water Development Office. The 500,000 is a one-time appropriation.
Very good. I'm looking for a second to that proposed amendment. It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? If not, let's vote. All in favor, please indicate by the raise of the right hand. All opposed may also indicate. We have a unanimous vote. Very good. Senator Hicks, do you have any other amendments?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have any, but I think Representative Larson, Senator-elect Larson might have one.
Open it up. Representative Larson, would you like to talk to us?
Trying to figure out how to turn the mute off. Can you hear me?
No, we can hear you just fine.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to bring an amendment. I think there might have been handed out. I've been working with Mr. Hopkinson on it. If not, I can wait a minute.
We have a draft of an amendment
Oh,
on section 9. Is that where you're referring to?
that is correct.
Border control?
Yes,
So we all have
I,
it in front of us. Proceed.
okay, Mr. Chairman, I would like to get the Border Control funded through the general fund. And I thinking this amendment for this next year, I know the present year, we've already taken it out of Water One account, but I would like to change that for next year so it comes out of the general fund. And then state that in the next bienniums that the Border Control be funded out of the general fund. That's my amendment.
We have a motion and a second. So Representative Larson, I'm looking here at the handout you've given us. Help me understand where this section 9, this is the budget of the state engineer, is that? And so you're changing the footnote to 2. It's the intent of the legislature that funds appropriated to the state engineer for the Border Control Division be made from the general fund in the 2025-2026 fiscal biennium and any subsequent fiscal biennium. I think that's self-explanatory. You're just, rather than taking the costs of the Border Control out of the water funds, you're suggesting that let's put those salaries back into the general fund like most other agencies are funded.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman. And if needed, maybe Mr. Hopkinson can explain it a little bit better, but I think this does what I'm looking for.
David, where does this fit into our proposed bill that we have in front of us?
And so, Mr. Chairman, just to go over this, and then, I do want to highlight a couple of concerns from LSO. This bill, this amendment, what it would do is it would go into the budget bill of last year and amend last year's budget bill just to change the stream of the funding from account 1 to the general fund. The numbers that you see there are going to need to be tweaked because really it'd only be about half of that, but we don't have those numbers just yet. But for the actual, what would go in the bill, it would reflect properly. The way this amendment is structured is that it would be the fiscal year would complete, and then the next fiscal year would come out from general funds instead of account 1. Now, there are a couple of concerns that LSO has with how this works, and I want to preface this by saying the committee absolutely could do it this way if that's what they choose to do. There's nothing to prevent you from doing that. But generally speaking, our office strongly recommends that any changes to the budget bill be made in the budget bill itself, and that we avoid making changes to the budget bill outside of the budget bill, which is what this would be doing. The second concern it stems from the single subject rule, that this may be going beyond the single subject rule for this particular bill, which deals with water planning as opposed to the funding of the Border Control. But that's a determination for the committee. I'm not saying it does or doesn't, just expressing that potential concern with the way this is structured. And LSO would strongly recommend that this amendment be made to the budget bill as a budget amendment. But again, I want to be clear, we're not saying you can't do this. This is totally a determination of the committee, but that is our recommendation.
Representative Larson, could you respond to that? Why are you bringing this into the omnibus bill and not taking it in front of the Appropriations Committee?
Mr. Chairman, I just think that we'll have better luck doing it this way. I don't think we're hiding anything. I think it's a better way to go about it. I have been working with Senator Hicks on this, and he has spoken to the new to become speaker on the other side, that they're okay with pursuing this. Their intent is not to fight it. Maybe Senator Hicks could comment a little bit.
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, so there's a number of ways that legislatively that we can effectuate this. And so one of the things that I certainly intend to do as a current member of the Appropriation Committee is bring this to the Appropriations Committee. It's not unusual to run one aspect in the budget and the other one as a bill. Typically, in the end of that process, the bill controls, because the budget's for 2 years. And so it's kind of back to the old philosophy of, do you need suspenders in a belt? And I think we do on this issue, and I think it just is prudent of this committee to move forward. So I'm okay with putting it in here. I fully intend to move forward with trying to do this through the appropriations process also. So it's a duplicate process, just to, again, highlight the importance of the issue. With the issue of the single subject, that's very easy to resolve, Mr. Chairman, and we could very easily at this point in time go in here and change the name of this as the Omnibus Water Bill Planning and Administration. Then it gets rid of the single subject issue, and that would be very easy just to put "and administration" at the end of the title of the bill, and then it's not single, it still deals with water planning and administration. So that's how we could deal with that if we felt compelled. I'm not worried about that issue. I think that the bill's broad enough with water planning that we don't need to do that, but that's one way we could remedy that. I do have a couple other questions associated with the proposed amendment, and then one minor, hopefully friendly amendment to it. So first, Mr. Chairman, what I'd like to do is offer a friendly amendment to that.
Hold on a second. We have not received a second on the original amendment.
I seconded it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Please proceed with your friendly amendment.
So is the amendments currently construed on line 2 after controlled division? I would like to add the word "shall." So it will now read, "It is the intent of the legislature that funds appropriated to the state engineer for the Board of Control Division shall be made from the general fund." I think that just provides
Representative Larson, do you
real
accept that as a
clarification.
friendly amendment to your amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I do.
Very good. Okay, we've just added the word "shall" to the amendment. Any further discussion on the amendment? Representative Eklund.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm subject to correction on this, but I think that the committee and others need to be aware of a little of the history of this thing. When I first started legislature 12 years ago, water development and water regulation were two separate things. The state engineer's office was separate. And it's my belief that Board of Control was shifted to the Water Development Office simply as a budget balancer. And if that was what happened, then we have funds flush enough to correct that and get it back, separate those two. And I think that it makes this a pretty palatable amendment and palatable to the Appropriations Committee as well to get this corrected while we can. And I think it's probably good for the state engineer's office as well as especially water development, because that's several $1 million we weren't able to use for water development. Before we vote, and so that people are understanding of what we're trying to do, which was bring it back to what it was, water development and state engineer's office was, I thought I just ought to relay that.
Thank you. Any other comments? So I'm going to add my thoughts on this committee. I'm really hesitant to do this. I absolutely 100% supportive of getting the Board of Control out of our budget. But this water omnibus bill has one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to advance projects through the state. Now, we've already reached out and grabbed one item, and that is to transfer $500,000 for the Green River Conveyance Law Study. And now we just with our last amendment, we just added an FTE, which is marginal in my mind. Again, I think these things ought to be going through the Appropriations Committee. I'm glad that Senator Hicks is planning to do that, to push it through the appropriations, and I'll certainly add my influence there. But this is the wrong place, folks. I think we're jeopardizing our entire omnibus bill by throwing in too many things. I'm good with the first two, but this third one is just too much of a reach for me. We ought to really put our efforts in the Appropriations Committee and persuade them that this is the right thing to do. I'm just not interested in jeopardizing our omnibus bill to be able to be successful on this budgetary. So I'm going to vote no on this because I just don't think it's the right place for us. Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to vote yes because I think the more times we can get this in front of our colleagues who are not as exposed to this aspect of water development and this issue as we are, need to hear it as many times as we can. And I'm completely comfortable with the belt and suspenders aspect of it. We are seeing a turnover in membership like we haven't seen in the past. And so any bill that we can put this in, I believe we can make our case over and over again to them. And so I'm completely supportive and comfortable with this in this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Boner.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I just point out that this bill is going to go through the Appropriations Committee anyways. Appreciate the belt and suspenders comment by my colleague. It's not as if Appropriations won't have anything to say about it. And so in my mind, it's 6 one way, half a dozen the other. The votes are going to be what they're going to be, but I do appreciate, the more opportunities we have, the better off we're going to be. This is an important policy decision, something I frankly appreciate the comments from my co-chairman with the House Ag Committee. This never should have happened to begin with. And so I have no problem, having more than one option in front of us.
Understand.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Senator Hicks.
just a little bit on this. I don't think this jeopardizes the bill one iota. We always go through the whole process. There'll be a series of amendments. There'll be whatever it starts in the House, there'll be amendments, may or may not. There's 3 opportunities to amend it. The committee's got an opportunity to amend it. The Appropriations Committee's got an opportunity to amend it. 3 readings in each house. So it's going to go 5 times through different bodies of the legislature that have an opportunity to amend this. And if it becomes objectionable for any of those bodies, the only thing they have to do is run an amendment to pull subsection or footnote number 2 out of here. It's a very simple amendment. I don't think it in any way jeopardizes the bill, given the long and arduous process this has to go through together. And I do think it continues to throw this issue in front of the legislature that this account has been raided. We're sitting here with $400,000 in account 1 right now that would have never happened. We've now done this to the tune of somewhere around $60 million that we've drained out of water development accounts to fund the Board of Control. We need to have this issue front and center before the legislature every single opportunity that we can to drive that issue home. And this is just one more tool to say this is important to the state of Wyoming. It is a policy decision. We are looking at $1 billion surplus. If there's not a time to do this now, because back to our colleague here, the chairman of the House Ag Committee pointed out, this was done as a budget austerity measure when we were broke. Folks, we're not broke anymore. The Board of Control is one of the only, if not the only, constitutionally mandated agency in our Constitution. It's been funded on the general fund since 1890 when we first became a state, and it needs to go back on the general fund. Only 2 times in the history of the state of Wyoming have we ever taken funding for the Board of Control out of water development accounts, and both times those are due to fiscal austerity. We just did not have the money. That is not the case today, and we need to keep this front and center. So I'm going to support this. Mr. Chairman, the only thing that I would ask as a question of the bringer of the amendment is, given where we're at financially, it seems to me, and as we look at the water development accounts, as Representative Larson, just your thoughts as to why wouldn't we make this effective immediately for this supplemental budget to go ahead and do that now instead of put it off to the biennium. And so here's the implications of that. We just have authorized additional expenditures off the general fund for all this Green River Basin stuff. If we were to make this effectively now, it has the effect of putting a little more than $7 million back into water development account, starting July 1 moving forward. We could then take all of those expenditures off of the general fund and put them back down water development. So the 1.125 million in the ongoing position for the Green River Basin could all be funded out of water development starting this budget cycle, because we'd have the money to do that if we made this effectively now instead of waited till another biennium. So I just like Representative Larson, what his thoughts are about maybe striking that language out of there and making it effective for this budget.
Mr. Chairman, if I actually may just step in to clarify one point on
Go ahead,
how
David.
this works. So the way it's structured is that it wouldn't take effect for the next biennium. It would be effective at the end of the fiscal year. So it would become effective July 1st, 2023. And the reason for that effective date was to give the Board of the Control through the end of the year, really frankly, for just the administrative ease of switching funds sources at the end of a fiscal year instead of 9 months in. So that is, a judgment call of the committee, but the way it's drafted is intended to capture that last, fiscal year as opposed to waiting until the next biennium itself.
So,
So could you explain that again? Because, so tie that in, David, if you may, Mr. Chairman, through you. Because in the footnote, it says general fund in the 25-26 fiscal year, which doesn't kick in until July 1st of 2024. Correct?
And so the second footnote there was just a flag, in a sense, to the future that that it is the intent that these funds in the future now come from the general fund.
Okay.
But the actual change taking place up above there would be effective.
Okay,
And as I
that's very
mentioned, those
helpful.
numbers are gonna be, those aren't the right numbers, so we will need to tweak those as
Yeah.
we know what those are.
So it does become effective then at the end of, starting this next fiscal year,
Yes.
which is July 1st of 2023. That just says going forward, it goes, it continues.
And that, yes, the footnote is just that, highlighting it to the future. As you know, we can't bind future legislators, but they can certainly take that recommendation and go with
We
that.
can always attempt to tell them what to do. They just may not listen.
okay, folks.
Mr.
Senator
Chairman?
Hicks. Yes, Representative Larson.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that was the intent of what I brought. Working with Mr. Hopkinson, that was my desire, is that this becomes effective beginning of this next July.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you for that clarification. The footnote just threw me off a little bit, but I understand what we're doing here now. Thank you.
Okay, so we're back on the amendment. It was suggested we add a word to the title of the bill to make that our position stronger. Would Representative Hicks, you suggested,
Mr. Chairman, we've got a motion on the floor. Before we move on to another proposed amendment, should we dispose of the current motion to add shall, or was that just as?
I was going to actually do it as a friendly amendment because it pertains to this.
Okay,
So
do we want to?
what word would you add?
So if you really wanted to try to beef that up, so it potentially navigates the issue of single subject, it would just be omnibus water bill planning and administration.
Representative Larson, would you consider that a friendly amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I would.
Very good. Okay, members, I think we're good with this, and I value your input. Thank you very much for helping me understand that. It was good for me to hear and to recognize that appropriations literally will be able to just line item this right out. It's a flick of the bic, and they have the authority in their committee to do that. And so that gives them the ability to decide whether we use the belt or the suspenders. So I think it's important that we're unified in this. So I'm going to stay with you. I'm going to vote yes on this amendment to send the message to the Appropriations Committee. So any other comments? If not, we'll proceed with voting. All those in favor, please raise the right hand. Any opposed? Raise the hand. Unanimous vote. Thank you. All right. Representative Larson, any other amendments? Does anyone else have any amendments to the planning bill? What time is it? We're doing good. All right. We are now ready to do a roll call vote. Kaylee, would you call roll on this working draft of the omnibus planning bill?
Senator Boner. Senator Driscoll.
Aye.
Senator French.
Aye.
Senator Grew is here. Senator Steinmetz. Aye. Representative Banks. Representative Eklund.
Aye.
Representative Larson.
Aye.
Representative Nyman is not present. Representative Paxton.
Aye.
Chairman Simpson.
Aye.
Vice Chairman Hicks.
Aye.
Got 9 ayes and 3 not present.
Very good, folks. We are 6 minutes behind schedule and we're moving on to the omnibus construction bill. Interim Director Mead, take away.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'll do the same as I did on the planning bill and just remind you, all the projects that are in the construction bill were applied for as of September 1, and those were considered in the November commission meeting. So we've had quite a bit of discussion on these. I would refer you to the summary table that has the construction bill laid out at the top. This is pretty much similar to the planning bill. As you can see, there's the second column from the left shows all the bill pages, and it's in sequential order of the bill. And you can see some divisions within the summary table. So that first division is construction projects out of the new development account 1. The second division are construction projects out of account 2 or rehabilitation. So all those new construction projects out of the 2 accounts make up section 1 of the bill. Then we move down to that kind of third division in the spreadsheet. And these are all the amendments to existing projects, sponsor contingency funds, et cetera, small water program. And they're basically in order of the session law. So the oldest session law is amended first. So they're kind of mixed up in regards to account 1 or account 2 projects. And so all of those amendments make up section 2 of the bill. And then you move further down on that summary table near the bottom, you can see the one that's labeled section 3 in the third column. And that is going to be the transfer of funds from account 1 to account 2. As you recall, there's quite a few projects that are contingent upon that transfer to be able to put enough funds into account 2 to be able to fund those projects. And we'll get to that as we go through the bill. Section 4 is the transfer of funds from the general fund in the amount of $50 million to account 3. If you recall, that was a conversation that was had, I think a motion that was brought from the Select Water Committee back at the November meeting. And then section 5 is the clarification to the Emergency Water Projects Program that would clarify, instead of, it was a bit ambiguous, it was $3 million per biennium. And we added some language, or suggested adding some language that say that would be $3 million per project per biennium in the Emergency Water Projects Program. And again, we'll get to that in the bill. And then section 6 and section 7 of the bill, which aren't on this summary table, are just, section 7 is a repeal of some language, and we'll get to that. That's just really an LSO suggestion. And then section 7 is providing for an effective date. So in total, the construction bill is 51 pages and seven different sections. And I'll now refer you to page 1 of the bill, laid out pretty similarly as we start here to the planning bill. And that first section, or I would call it the introduction on page 1, just talks about and explains what's contained in the bill. So I'll paraphrase: authorizing construction of designated water projects, describing projects, specifying terms and conditions of funding, providing grants, providing appropriations, amending the sponsor's contingency fund, amendments or amending amounts and terms of appropriations for specified prior projects, transferring funds from account 1 to account 2, transferring funds from general fund to account 3, and then clarifying the funding limits to the emergency water projects account. We move over to page 2, line 2. This is, so every year, the construction projects are set up as Title 99 statutes. So as you can see on line 2, this is going to set up 99.32801 through 99.32804. So in 2022, last legislative session, that would have looked very similar, except it would have been 99.32701 through 2704. Previous year, 2601, 2604. So then as you move down to line 8, 99.32801 just provides definitions, and that refers back to statute 99.3101. So these are a statute that is used over and over again, and the definitions are things such as defining the word commission, sponsor, water development account 1, 2, 3. On line 12 is just a general authorization through 99.3102. And then on line 16, we have the actual, this would be 99.32803, which is our account 1 new development level 3 construction projects. And as we get into that, it provides authorization, or authorization is granted for level 3 new development construction projects. And they are subject to general conditions specified in Wyoming statute 99.3.103, provided that, and I won't read through that, but what that basically says is, if you refer back to these statutes that are in here, is if the sponsor does not have the authority to assess its members, then they would be required to have a sinking fund or repair and maintenance fund. So I believe all the project sponsors that we have on projects this year do have that authority to assess their members, so we wouldn't be requiring that. But that's just what that language is referring to. If they don't have that authority, then they would be required to set up that sinking fund for repair and maintenance. Okay, so our actual projects for new development, account 1, starts on page 3, line 2. And I'll go over this first project in more detail just to remind everybody what the format is. So as you see on line 2, we have the project title, this one in particular, the Cloud Seeding Medicine Bow and Sierra Madre Mountain Range 2024 aerial application. We then go down to line 5. We state who the project sponsor is. Line 7 is the project purpose. Line 11, we get into the very general project description. Line 15, we put in the total project dollar amount. And then on line 18, we actually say the appropriation amount. So just quick comment on that. Projects that would be just asking for grant dollars. So for example, a 67% grant, let's say it's $1 million project. The total project budget would be $1 million, but the appropriation would only be $670,000. So you will see some differences sometimes between the total project budget and the appropriation amount. This particular one for the Cloud Seeding and the Medbow Sierra Madres, as you'll see, the total project dollar amount is $875,000 on line 16. And then on line 21, the appropriation is for $825,000. Reason for that is Cheyenne Board of Public Utilities contributes $50,000 each year for that particular program, as they get some benefit out of that. Then moving on to page 4, line 2, this is a continuation of the appropriation section for each project, and that provides for a reversion date. This one in particular is reverting to account 1 and on July 1st of 2025. Then we get down to line 4 of page 4, and that's where we would provide any special conditions for an individual project. So now I'll move on to the next project, and I'll kind of run through these fairly quickly, and I'll stop on the projects that are somewhat unique that we've talked about in November, so you can see how we handled those in the bill. So on page 4, line 18 is our next project, and that's the cloud seeding Wind River and Sierra Madre Mountain Ranges 2024. This is the ground-based. And it has all the same sections that I was just talking about with the previous project. Move on to page 6, line 16. This is the Happy Valley Water Transmission and Storage 2023 project. The thing I'll mention here is if we move over to page 7, starting on line 2, if you recall, we had quite a bit more requests than we had funding this year. So we came up with the plan on how we were going to address all those. And one way of doing that was with these account 1, level 1 projects, which are mostly municipal projects, is that we felt that it would not hold the project up by only appropriating design and pre-construction dollars for this year, and then they could come back next year for the actual construction dollars for the capital construction costs. So as you'll see on page 7, line 2, we show that project description is design and pre-construction of water transmission pipeline, et cetera. So you'll see that on these first several projects here where we're just funding pre-construction. Moving on to page 8, line 12. So our next project, Sheridan Northeast Transmission Main Extension 2023. Down on line 16, you'll see the same project description language, design and pre-construction. Next project would be started at the very bottom of page 9, line 21. That's the South End Water Users Improvement and Service District Pipeline 2023. And then we get over to page 11, line 13. This is this is the end of our account 1 construction projects, and the 9923 or 99.32804 section or portion of section 1 on line 13 of page 11 is where we start our rehab projects. So our new construction projects in account 2. And again, similar language as before, provides authorization for level 3 rehabilitation projects and refers to those same statutes in regards to the powers to assess their members and the need for a sinking fund if necessary. Our first project under account 2 is at the bottom of the page there on page 11, line 23, and that's the Casper Alcova Irrigation District lateral 256 drop structure. And again, these, as you move on to page 12, the layout of each project here is just the same as it is in account 1 with the project sponsor, purpose, description, et cetera. I will point out on this one, on page 13, line 15, so we're under the special conditions section for the K lateral 256 pipeline. This project, along with pretty much all these projects in account 2, will be dependent on or contingent upon the transfer of funds from water development account 2, from account 1 to account 2. And that'll be laid out here and described in section 3 when we get to that section. Next project is on the bottom of page 13, spills over onto page 14, Enterprise Watershed Improvement District Calvert Lateral 2023. Again, nothing real unique to point out in the legislation here. Then move to page 16, line 10. This is the Goshen Irrigation District 56 Pipeline Phase 1 2023 project. I'll point out as we move over to page 17, the paragraph starting on line 2. This is the first materials only, 100% materials only grant project. So just to talk through some of that language on line 4, this is for the purchase of project materials as supported by vendor invoices. And it would be not to exceed $149,600 or 100% of the approved material costs, whichever is less. Then move on to page 18, starting on line 4. This is under special conditions for that same materials only project. As you'll see, the sponsor is responsible for retaining professional engineering services to design the project, compile materials and bidding documents, and monitor construction activities, including the installation of project components and the tracking of project expenditures. So that's how all the materials-only projects are laid out. And again, as you see under that last section, starting on line 11, this again is contingent upon that transfer of funds from account 1 to account 2. Next project is on page 18, line 16, Hart Mountain Irrigation District lateral R4S 2023. Next project is on page 20, line 15. This is the Interstate Irrigation and Reservoir Irrigation District Canal Phase 3 2023 study. Construction project. Next project would be on page 22, line 15. Lakeview Irrigation District Rock Creek Siphon 2023. Next project's on page 24, line 17. Midvale Irrigation District Wyoming Canal Phase 1 2023 project. And that brings us to the end of the account 2 level 3 construction projects. Are there any questions on that before I move into section 2 amendments? Okay, so on page 26, starting on line 18, we show the title amendments to prior projects. Moving down to line 20 of page 26, this is where we again restate all the previous legislation that's going to be amended in this section. And again, it's in chronological order, so the oldest section law gets amended first. So then you have kind of a mix and match of account 1, account 2, back to account 1, etc. So the first amendment is on page 27, line 12. This is a sponsor's contingency fund for the new development. As you recall, we're going to increase that by $4 million. So you can see that on lines 15 and 16 of page 27. The original appropriation was $3 million, and we're changing that to $7 million. And this is kind of an ongoing appropriation. So as that account is drawn down, we then ask to add additional funds to that. So that would take that up to $7 million. And if you recall, quite a few of these amendments or sponsors requesting amendments were not only for time extensions, but also for funding. And because we are short on funds this year, what we did in looking at that was we said, okay, if you have everything in place and concurrence to bid from our office, which means you have your easements in place, your design finished, and all your construction permits ready and completed, ready to go by September 1 of this year, which was with the application deadline for construction projects, then we would give you that readiness to bid status. And if you ask for additional funds, then we would recommend those additional funds. If you weren't quite ready yet, or you were going to be ready at some point in the future, then the way we were handling that was we would recommend the extension of time so the funding wouldn't revert, the original funding. But with the sponsor contingency funds, we would add funds to those. So we're going to be doing that here in account 1 and account 2. And then when those projects that weren't recommended for additional funding are ready to go to construction, they would come back to the commission and the select water committee and ask for funds out of the sponsors contingency funds. And the reason we did that was, one, we don't want to tie up funding through legislation and then just have the project languish, and that funding could have been used for a project that is ready sooner. And two, thinking some of these projects that have been languishing, that will give them some incentive to get things ready to go and to move forward and be first in line for that sponsor contingency fund. So moving on to page 28, line 4. And I should mention one thing on line 2 of page 28. So this is the very end of the amendment for the sponsor contingency fund for the new development account 1, is we would be extending the reversion date on that to 2027. So now moving down to line 4 on page 28. This is the sponsor contingency fund for rehabilitation. And then as we discussed in November, down on lines 7 through 9, we're increasing that funding from 4.5 million to 5.7 million. So the increase of 1.2 million as we discussed. Then down on line 18, we're doing the same thing. We're extending that reversion date for that account to 2027. The one thing that's slightly unique about the rehabilitation sponsors contingency fund, we added a special condition. So over on page 29, line 4, that appropriation of $1.2 million to that fund would be contingent upon a transfer of funds from account 1 to account 2, that $11.2 million transfer. So moving on now to the ETD water supply project on line 14 of page 29. This one was a little unique just because it was a modification to the project where costs came in high, so they asked if they could remove or modify the project slightly to move forward with the existing budget, and then with the intention of coming back to our program for additional funding later for a water transmission pipeline. They also have RUS, I believe it's RUS money, and that's about ready to expire, so they plan to go back to RUS as well. So to modify that, on line 17 of page 29, we simply struck the transmission pipeline portion of that project description. Moving on to page 30, line 9. This is a small water development projects. And as you recall, we wanted to increase these small water development projects. This is account 1 by $1 million. And so as you look down on lines 12 through 15, when we talk about total project budget, you recall small water projects are 50% up to $35,000 grant. So when we talk about let's say a $70,000 project, we would only grant $35,000, but the total project cost would be $70,000. So if we're adding $1 million to the potential grants, then the total project cost for that million would be $2 million. So that's why you see 2 million, 15,326,000 to 17,326,000 for total project budget. And again, this is similar to the sponsors contingency fund, where it's an ongoing appropriation, and as the funds dwindle down, we just add additional funds. So this is kind of throughout the history of the small water program, the 17 million plus. And then as you see under the project grant on lines 21 through 23 of page 30, changing the grant from 7,663,000 to 8,663,000. So that shows the $1 million increase, a little clearer. Okay, so now on to page 31, line 17. We've got the Arapahoe pipeline and tank. This particular project was ready to bid as of that September 1, 2022 deadline. So this is an increase in funds. And I believe they also had some RUS money. So with that additional funding to help take care of the additional project costs, the 6733 grant changed a little bit. So as you'll see on page 32, line 9, our 67 grant's now 44% grant. And the project sponsor would be responsible for the 56% difference, which is where the RUS funds would come in. Okay, on to page 33, line 7, Broken Wheel Ranch Water Supply 2017. Just a time extension on line 15. Go down to line 17, Gillette Regional Extensions 2017. Again, just time extension. Moving over to page 34, line 7. This is the Levitt Reservoir Expansion Project that we had quite a bit of conversation on back in November. And as you may recall, there's an original appropriation of $46 million out of account 3. And the new estimate is $78 million. So that is shown on lines 9 through 11 on page 34 there. So the original total project budget was estimated to be 46 million. That's been changed to 78 million. And I would mention before I continue to go down through this, there was a request for kind of a fact sheet to be provided to the Select Water Committee and whoever would be carrying the bill on the floor. So we're putting that together and we'll make sure we get that to everybody. So you have that information when we're out on the floor here during session. So I'd probably draw your attention over to page 35, starting on line 14. So we have the sponsors contingency fund for account 3, and there was a total of $35 million in that sponsors contingency fund. And what the original recommendation was in November was to more or less revert that funding from the sponsors contingency fund to account 3 and then reappropriate it to the Levitt Reservoir project. And for reasons we discussed in November, the way we're handling this now is basically just, as you'll see at the beginning of that section, appropriation and authorization. So it's the original appropriation of the $46 million from account 3, no changes there. You do get down to line 20 on page 35. We asked for an extension of time, which we're showing that 2025 to 2027, and then just being really transparent in that there is authorized for expenditure by the commission from sponsors contingency fund account 3 with the legislation or the statute that creates that. That spills over on the next page. $32 million to carry out the purpose of this subsection. So we're really just, again, being transparent that we're authorizing that money out of the sponsors contingency fund instead of reverting it to account 3 and then reappropriating it. Any questions on that? Okay. Okay, moving on to, still on page 36, line 7, Gillette Regional Extensions, Phase 4 to 2018. Just a simple time extension. Move down to line 18, Melody Ranch Water System Improvements. Again, this is just a time extension. On to page 37, line 9, Riverton Valley Irrigation District Rehabilitation 2018. Again, we're looking at time extension. The next project starts on line 23 of page 37 and runs on over to page 38. Getting repetitive here, another time extension. And again, this is projects that we would expect to see come back for some of those sponsor contingency funds later once they're ready to go to bid. On line 10 of page 38, the Lander Storage Tank and Pump Station 2019. This was one that we felt was ready to bid as of September 1 of 2022. So this would be for additional funding as well, grant dollars. Yeah, so that would be shown under project grant on line 23 of page 38, and then also the subsequent appropriation section on the next page, line or page 39, lines 6 through 8. On to line 16 of page 39, the Shoshone Irrigation District Rehab 2019 project. This was also a project we felt was ready to proceed forward, and I believe this was a materials only grant, so we're just providing additional grant dollars to that materials only, and that I believe I said spills onto page 40. At the bottom of page 40 on line 23, we have the Glenrock Transmission Pipeline 2020 project. Again, it's just time extension. On page 41, line 13 is the Cottonwood Irrigation District Transmission Pipeline 2020 project. And this was for some additional funding. And yeah, and they received some federal funding as well. So as you work your way down through the project grant and loan and then special conditions, it just basically effectuates rather than just a 6733 grant loan. Those percentages have changed a little bit because they've brought federal funding into that funding of that project. Next project is on page 43, line 12, the Sidon Irrigation District Sidon Canal 2020 project. Very similar This was another materials-only project that needed additional funding. And we have a special condition on this one on page 44, line 16, and that's simply that funding, that additional funding is contingent upon the transfer of funds from account 1 to account 2. Next project is on page 45, line 5, Torrington Well Connection 2021, simple time extension. Page 45, line 18, the Shoshone Irrigation District Improvements 2021 project. And yeah, this is another materials only grant where they need some additional funding because of inflation. Down on page 46, line 22 is the Dry Creek Irrigation District Pipeline Replacement 2022 project. Again, we have a time extension. Page 47, line 10. This is the Goshen Irrigation District Tunnel Rehab 2022 project, and I'll point out a couple of things here. So we went into on lines 12 through 19 of page 47. If you recall, we had $2.35 million total appropriated last legislative session for design of this particular project. And that was split up into 49% was for Goshen at a 6733 grant loan. And then 51% of that 2.35 million was for a loan to Goshen Irrigation District, more or less for the Nebraska side of the design. And of course, Nebraska is coming up with their own funding now. And as we heard back in November, the costs have gone up somewhat on the design of that particular project. So what we are doing is, and again, as we discussed, taking the 2.35 million and then changing that all to 67% grant, 33% loan on the project. So as you'll see on the total project budget, lines 13 through 15, instead of saying the entire budget is 2.35, we're now saying the entire budget is $4,795,920. That's basically 2.35 million divided by 49% to get to that number. And then as you look down on lines 18 and 19, we say the sponsor's project budget is 2.35 million or 49% of the total project budget, whichever is less. So as we go through that, and we know right now roughly the 49% of the design or pre-construction activities equates to about $1.9 million, not a total of 2.35. So there's some additional funding there. The agreement that our office or the commission will have with the district will be for that roughly $1.9 million number. And I believe that's, and if they were if unforeseen things come up during the design or they need additional funds, we don't want to have to go back through the legislative session. That's why we would like to keep that full 2.35 appropriated. If they don't need it, that'll then probably spill over into the construction dollars. But if they do need it, they'll then be required to come back to the commission and the Select Water Committee to amend that agreement from the 1.9 to whatever additional funds they need, right? Everybody clear on that? No, it gets throwing a lot of numbers out there and kind of confusing.
Director, folks, remember in the Star Valley meeting, one of the reasons this was necessary is because there was a significant change order request by the consultant on the design. And I expressed concern at that time and sent them back to the drawing board. And I'm pleased to report to you that the Goshen Irrigation District, as well as the Water Development Commission staff, have negotiated that significantly down. And I'm really comfortable with that proposed change order. So I'm recommending we approve this and go forward with it. Please proceed, Director.
Okay, so on to page 48. Line 4 and 5. So we just show the original 67% grant was 771,505, and now the 67% of that 2.35 takes that grant up to 1.5 million and change. Then moving down to line 11 of page 48. I noticed when I was reading through this legislation that we forgot to have the language engineering analysis in that description. We had that language in the project grant, but not in the project loan. So that's just a simple cleanup there. And then down on line 15 and 16, you show that we amend the 33% of the 2.35 now for the loan is $775,500. I'll get to this in a second, but as you recall, we also had a large paragraph for that 51% loan. And we struck that in its entirety. So instead of having that here in a strikeout version or manner, LSO said we typically handle that in a different repeals section. So that'll be here in just a second under section 6. All right, so now moving on to page 49, line 4, section 3. And as you read down through that, this is simply the transfer of $11.2 million from account 1 to account 2. So a lot of that contingent language is on this, referring to section 3. Then down to line 10 of page 49. This is the appropriation of $50 million from the general fund to water development account 3, as discussed in November. Down on line 14, we have the beginning of section 5, and this section is clarifying the emergency water projects program. And so if you then drop down to line 22 of page 49, or say starting on line 21, the total amount awarded under this subsection for each emergency water project shall not exceed $3 million per fiscal biennium. So that cleans up that ambiguous language. And then jumping over to page 50, line 19. This is section 6, the repeals section that I just mentioned. You'll see several different statutes here, and the reason for that is we had a couple of other projects that we're amending this year that in previous legislation had that special condition of contingent upon the transfer from account 1 to account 2, because we've had to do that in previous years. And that transfer obviously occurred in that session year. So talking with LSO, it made sense just to clean that up and remove that special condition on that particular project from before. So it repeals a couple of those special conditions in addition to that project loan for the GID tunnel with the 51%, which you see that on page 51, that reference to that project loan paragraph. And then that brings us to the end of the bill on line 32 of page 51, section 7, which is just providing for an effective date for the construction bill.
Shoo. Thank you, Jason. That was a lot of work, and thank you for you and your staff for producing this bill as well as our legal counsel. Appreciate all of you. Members, do you have any questions for your Director Mead? Go ahead, Representative Reckland.
I guess I would like to add, I really appreciate the paper copy. Trying to flip back and forth on a computer is nearly impossible for me. So for at least some of us older members, I appreciate having paper.
Amen.
Senator Boner.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. That it goes for some of the younger members as well. So that's not a generational thing. So I just had a quick question, if it's okay, Mr. Chairman, about something that's not in this bill, and probably a good reason for that. Just want an update on La Perelle, the replacement of the dam there. I think last I heard from you, obviously we hopefully got enough appropriated through the entirety of the planning process. If I remember correctly, phase 3 should be done in September of next year. I'm just wondering, just want to make sure that everything's on schedule there, and if you have any updates from the Bureau of Rec, especially at how that process is ongoing and how you see the project moving forward. I think that'd be great within the context of this bill, making sure we don't need anything in the construction bill. If we're going to be completed a few months after the beginning of the fiscal year with the planning, just want to double check, make sure we don't need anything to keep that project moving along.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we've had some recent conversations with the Financial Assistance Office, Bureau of Reclamation, and they've requested us to start filling out does sound like the funds would be coming through the water development program rather than directly to the district. And we haven't had all the detailed discussion with them yet. That's yet to come, where we'll have more involvement with the district and so on and so forth. But had a preliminary conversation with them and are in the process of filling out the federal forms to get set up in the federal system to basically receive the initial $5 million from fiscal year '23 that the Bureau had in their spend plan, which I'm confident that we'll get that soon enough then to keep the project moving. And before that, September, I think it was, where we were of '23, where we thought our state funds would get us to, we should be well within that and hopefully be able to start spending federal funds and not state dollars anymore here pretty soon.
I just follow up based off that. So will we know for sure whether that will be, in fact, be the case before or after we get done with our session coming up in a month?
Mr. Chairman, I would hope that we would know or have all that paperwork done and finalized before the end of session, but it might line up pretty close to that time frame.
Mr. Chairman, just to comment if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Well, if it's a matter of filling out paperwork, it'd make me feel much more comfortable if we had some, I guess, definitive answers before we got done with this construction bill, at least. If not, we might have to consider at least the possibility that those funds, for whatever reason, would not be approved. And so we might want to consider contingent provision within this bill, if that is in fact the case. Otherwise, I think if it looks like if you assume that everything's going to be going great, I'd just like to know for certain before we make a final decision on this piece of legislation. So don't need an answer from me right now, but I think going forward, I think it's important that we understand all the moving parts here. Just appreciate your continued diligence. I appreciate all the work you've done so far.
Thank you. Committee, I'd like to call for public comment at this point in time. Is there anyone in the public that would like to speak on the omnibus water construction bill? Please come forward to the microphone. David, do we have anybody? Or Kaylee? No one online? Very good. Members, let's work this bill then. We have motion and a second to advance the water omnibus bill construction. The floor is open now for discussion. Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the construction bill.
Which page?
Page 50, after line 17. And it should be handed out to you. And we're just going to amend last year's session laws. But if I could get a second, I would explain it. What we would be doing is our supplemental water bill that dealt with La Perelle, which we just talked about, the Fontenelle Reservoir and GID. Funding last year required further legislative approval, Mr. Chairman. And so this amendment would just take out the legislative approval and put in the State Loan and Investment Board in its place. And the reasoning for that is because exactly what my good colleague from Converse County said, is that if we're not coming back to session in time and these projects need to move forward and they're all extremely important projects, that the funding would be available. The State Loan and Investment Board, which is our top 5 elected officials, could release those funds and keep those projects moving forward. We know that a lot of our work with those projects depends on 2 of them at least, on what the environmental impact, how they treat the environmental assessment, or if they get a categorical exemption, or if it's an EA or an EIS, or how that works. But we are really trying to get that categorical exemption because, for example, the tunnel will be in the same footprint, and so it shouldn't disturb anything around it, because they're just going with the SIM, which means they go in, they bore out the tunnel, and they replace it with new tunnel right in the same footprint. And La Perelle, we know that it's an existing dam, and we're hoping that we'll see those kinds of movements on that as well. And I know that that's hoping for the best and planning for the worst, as I've been told by some other colleagues. But I would like to hope for the best and see these projects move forward.
So Senator Steinmetz, can you direct us to a line and give us exact wording on what your amendment is on page 50?
Mr. Chairman, it would be a whole insertion of what was handed out to you. It's this paper right here, this proposed LSO amendment, which amends section 6 of the section 1 of 2022 Wyoming Session Laws, chapter 74. And it's in section 1, and that was the bill we passed last year, which was the supplemental water bill. And so it just changes the legislative authorization to the State Loan and Investment Board so that they can act more quickly than us who come in, once a year. So, and I've been told that it's inappropriate for the Select Water Committee to authorize that on their own. So what I was hoping to do is have the top 5 elected officials do that, so.
We'd like to have that kind of authority. So representatives and senators online, do you have a copy of the proposed amendment? You do have a copy of it. It's been emailed to you? Okay, so everyone understands the amendment. Is there a second to the amendment? Okay, the amendment's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, so to summarize and to make sure that we're on the same page, Senator Steinmetz, the appropriations that were set aside for those 2 projects last year, 3 projects last year, you're now suggesting that as any one of those 3 becomes available for construction and needs this money sooner than the legislature meets, they could go before the State Land Investment Board and they would authorize them to proceed. Is that correct? Any comments or discussions amongst the committee? Very good. Let's proceed to vote those then. All in favor, please indicate by the raise of the right hand. Any opposed? Very good. That's unanimous. Any other amendments from the committee?
Call for the question.
Seeing none. Kaylee, would you do a roll call vote for us, please?
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call vote for 23 LSO 0377 Omnibus Water Bill Construction as amended. Senator Boner. Senator Driscoll.
Aye.
Senator French.
Aye.
Running in the House.
Senator Guru. Senator Steinmetz.
Aye.
Representative Banks. Representative Eklund.
Aye.
Representative Larson.
Aye.
Representative Nyman. Representative Paxton.
Aye.
Chairman Simpson.
Aye.
Vice Chairman Hicks.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Staff, I really like the planning bill to be in front of the House first because we have so many new members. If we start with the construction bill, it's backwards. So in my mind, in their minds, we start with the planning and then we advance to the construction second. So let's send the planning bill to the House and the construction bill to the Senate. Anybody have any objections to that? Okay.
That kind of breaks with, Mr. Chairman, it breaks with tradition, doesn't it? But I'm okay with it. I just wonder, I think we've always started construction on the House side. But
The last
I
couple
see
of
the-
years we haven't, but maybe before that we might have.
okay, must have. I'm good with it.
Is everybody okay? All right. We'll proceed then. Very good. It is 10:45. And at 10:50, we're scheduled for a break. So we're going to take a 15-minute break. Let's come back at 11 a.m. and we'll start working the bills that we have developed over the interim. All right, Kaylee, let us know when we're back online. We're good to go? There we go. We got a quorum. Seems like every time we take a break, we lose half the audience. I'm going to stop taking breaks so we can retain everybody here. It's like when you go to city council meetings, the Boy Scouts, in order to get your Eagle Scout award, you have to sit through one city council meeting. And every time they take a break, that whole Boy Scout contingency bails out. They're out of here. That is the boringest meeting they could ever imagine. Larry, you understand that, don't you? You've been through many city council meetings. All right, folks, we are on agenda item number 6, easements for water conveyance. So the challenge here has been there are many ditches and canals in Wyoming that have just historically been there and may or may not have a proper easement filed legitimately in the county courthouse. And there continues to be conflicts in our state trying to resolve that when property owners want to deny irrigators an opportunity to maintain their ditches. And so it's kind of a difficult fine line to navigate because we want to establish a prescriptive easement for those people that rely on the ditch to convey their water, but on the same token, we're respectful of private property rights. And if a ditch isn't used and maintained for many years, then the question is how that shifts back. So we've been working on this now for 3 meetings, and I think we've got a fairly good bill here. It's not real strong, but on the same token, it moves us in the right direction to do the right thing without violating property rights. Committee, I'm open for discussion. I don't think we need to have David take us line by line through the bill because we've studied it extensively and it's actually just, 4 pages long. And so I'm looking for a motion so we can start.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make that motion.
Representative Larson moves. Representative Eklund seconds the motion to advance the bill. So we're now open. Oh, I should call for public input before we start debating the bill. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak on this prescriptive easement for water conveyance bill? Kaylee, do we have anyone online that would like to? All right, very good. Back to you folks, committee. What would you like to, does anybody have any amendments or anything they'd like to
Mr.
comment
Chairman,
on?
I
Senator
would like
Hicks.
to offer one amendment, and it's just, I think, more for clarification than anything else on page 3, line 8, the definition of water conveyance. I think we should, after the word ditch, include ditch, waste ditch, or drain ditch.
Before the word ditch, or you,
After, so
after the word
Yeah.
ditch, comma, you'd add the words
waste ditch or drain ditch.
waste ditch or drain ditch. I know what a drain ditch is. What would your definition of a waste
I
ditch
think
be?
actually you could just put drain ditch. They're synonymous.
I'm a little worried about waste being
Yeah.
construed as wastewater
Let's just put drain ditch, Mr. Chairman.
or drain
Ditch.
ditch. So a drain ditch would be a ditch that's pulling water off of some source, it's excess water that you're just trying to get rid of. It's not necessarily appropriated water. It's not water that's an irrigator is necessarily using.
It is appropriated. It's just when once it gets to the end of the field, it hits another ditch and drains that.
Okay. Return flow, okay.
It's just, we're conveying water. I just want to make it clear that when we're conveying water, it's not just to the head of the field, it's to the bottom of the field also.
Do I have a second for that motion? Thank you. So line 8 on page 3 would read, water conveyance means a canal, ditch, comma, drain ditch, comma, pipeline or other means of conveying water. Okay, all in favor of that amendment, please indicate by raising the right hand. Any opposed? Nope. Unanimous. Very good. Any other thoughts, comments, or amendments to this bill? If not, we'll vote on it. Kaylee, would you please call a roll call vote for us, please?
Mr. Chairman, this roll call vote is for 23 LSO 0046, easements for water conveyances as amended. Senator Boner. Senator Driscoll.
Excuse,
Senator French.
Aye.
Senator Grew is excused. Senator Steinmetz. Aye. Representative Banks is excused. Representative Eklund.
Aye.
Representative Larson.
Aye.
Representative Nyman is excused. Representative Paxton.
Aye.
Chairman Simpson.
Aye.
Vice Chairman Hicks.
aye.
Motion passes.
Very good. Thank you. We're now on agenda item number 7, construction ponds permitting for ponds. So we've discussed this bill twice in 2 previous meetings, but this is the first time you've seen this bill. So I'd like to lay the groundwork, and then we'll have David walk us through the lines of the bill. So folks, here's our challenge we're trying to address here. So we have, when a private property owner wants to build a pond on his private property, he quite often has to communicate with the Corps of Engineers if he has a diversion structure in a navigable water. He has to communicate with the State Engineer's Office to make sure that he has proper water rights. And there's 2 options he has there, is to convert an existing water right, typically an irrigation water right, into a pond water right, because there's seepage and evaporation that happens. So they're consuming water. The second option for them is to just simply file for a current date priority filing, which would put them beyond all the other water rights, but nevertheless give them a water right. And then also, we learned that there's communication with DEQ, and there's also sometimes communication with Wyoming Game and Fish. And so those 4 agencies, 3 state and 1 federal, that they could communicate with. And however, most of those agencies just have a checklist and review what they're doing and approve in their lane what's going on pertinent to their agency. And there is no agency that has oversight of all the committees, of all agency reviews, to say, yes, there's a problem with this pond. And certainly there's no one that, if they comply, there's no agency that could deny their request. So this bill is in an effort to create one, we call it flagship, that would review all of the agencies' inputs and make sure that there's nothing that would damage downstream users and damage the environment or damage the fishery or whatever we're looking at that could possibly be damaged by significant ponds in an area being constructed. And so with that as just a little bit of legwork, David, would you take us through the bill, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David Hopkinson with the Legislative Service Office, walking through 23 LSO 0378, Working Draft 0.4. What this bill does is it goes into the environmental quality statutes, where we see the creation of the Department of Environmental Quality, and including the Water Division, and it makes some amendments in there, and I'll go through those. The first change we see on page 2 is a new definition. It provides for a recreational pond, which would be any pond with a total surface area of not less than 1/2 acre that's used primarily for recreational purposes. And it specifically excludes, that it does not include ponds that are primarily for agricultural, industrial, or water treatment purposes. And so the only pond that this bill will be addressing is this new definition, this new recreational pond, and it's not intended to address any pond that's for those other purposes spelled out there. Next change we see is in the prohibited acts in 3511-301 that no person except when authorized by a permit, and the new paragraph 6, shall construct or substantially modify any recreational pond. In other words, that's where they would have to get that permit in order to construct that pond or substantially modify it. The next change on page 3, and this is under the Administrator's Authority in the Department of Environmental Quality for the Water Division. And what would require them that they will promulgate rules, standards, and permit systems. With that new paragraph 12, they would provide standards for the issuance of permits for construction or substantial modification of recreational ponds, and that those standards would include requirements for the construction or substantial modification of recreational ponds, including standards and specifications consistent with water quality requirements of this act, which would be that Environmental Quality Act, and to ensure the construction of the recreational pond, either individually or in aggregate, will not have a significant detrimental impact environmentally or to downstream water users. It would require, in subdivision B there, that public notice and the opportunity for public comment prior to the issuance of any permit for the construction or substantial modification of a recreational pond. And it would require consultation in subdivision C with the Wyoming State Engineer's Office and the Game and Fish Department to ensure that any permits required by those departments are already granted, if it's applicable to that particular pond, that they've already been issued. And then just to clarify there, nothing in this subparagraph should be construed to limit, modify, or expand any permitting requirements of the Wyoming State Engineer's Office or the Wyoming Game and Fish Department that may be applicable to a recreational pond. And that's just to clarify, we're not trying to change the standards of those offices. Next, changes in 3511-303 provides that an amendment on page 5 in line 2, simply noting that the administrator of the Water Quality Division, at the direction of the director, can conduct on-site compliance inspections to include recreational ponds. We've added that there. And that would be for any pond where a permit is issued pursuant to that new paragraph 6 is that requirement for recreational ponds that we saw previously. Line 16 there, the amendment to add paragraph 6, again, what this section is doing would be if requested by municipality, waste and sewer district, or county, that the administrator can actually delegate authority for them to promulgate those rules or to issue those permits, requiring that they meet the same standards of the permit system that the Department of Environmental Quality would have. So this would just allow some delegation to local entities to issue permits. And then on page 6, provides simply that delegation of authority is limited to, would add recreational ponds to that delegation of authority. And paragraph 3 there, adding those requirements, that those standards be at least as stringent as those promulgated by the department. And so that's just amending those statutes to include recreational ponds. At the bottom, in section 2, would provide an appropriation. That amount, we, at the time of the drafting, didn't have those numbers, so those numbers will need to be added to this bill. But it would add, appropriate from the general fund to the department for salaries, benefits, training, and other expenses necessary to implement this act. And provide that that would be for the period beginning with the effective date of the section and ending June 30th, 2024, and prohibit the transference of any of those funds for any other purposes, and that they would revert by law on June 30th, 2024. Subsection B would provide one full-time equivalent position to the department for purposes of this act. And subsection C clarifies that it's the intent of this legislature that that position that would be authorized and the funding provided shall be included in the department's standard budget for the succeeding fiscal biennium. And then section 3 would require the department to promulgate all rules and regulations necessary for this act, not later than July 1st, 2023. Two things I would highlight as potential amendments for the committee's consideration. It should actually be the Environmental Quality Council, not the department, to promulgate those rules. So that would be a change that I would recommend that the committee make as an amendment. And then the committee may wish to consider whether or not July 1st, 2023 is an appropriate date, as the department may need more time to promulgate those rules. And then finally, in section 4 is the effective date. That would, the act would be effective July 1st, 2023, with the effective date of the act on the rulemaking promulgations being effective immediately, simply to allow them to begin promulgating those rules prior to the rest of the act being effective. And with that, I would stand for any questions on this.
Thank you, David. Are there questions for David concerning the bill?
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
David, when, excuse me, let me get on here, I'll get closer. So when we go to page 4 on here, and we get to subsection C, it says require consultation with the State of Engineers Office and the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. So consultation is one thing, and then we go on down to line 7, and this is requires a permit, and it says the State Engineers Office or the Wyoming Game and Fish Department for the construction or substantial modification of a recreational pond. I'm not aware of anywhere that either through rules or statutory provisions where the Wyoming Game and Fish Department has any authority over the construction or modification of embankments. And so I'm just curious as to how that works when they have no authorities to do that. The only thing that I could see that would be captured potentially under this for consultation is not the construction of the pond, but if you want to stock that with fish, you have to go to the Wyoming Game and Fish Department and get a permit. But are you aware or did find anything that gives them statutory or rulemaking that they have over constructions of any ponds?
Mr. Chairman, I would defer to the State Engineer's Office on that particular question. The issue is if there were anything that they do require a permit for that could also qualify as a recreational pond, then they would just consult with the department. So if there's not, then this wouldn't have any impact on them. But if there is something that would qualify that they do require a permit for, it would fall under this subsection.
And committee, we're going to bring the state agencies up here in a minute, so maybe. Okay, David, we'll let you take a back seat for a minute. Let's start with the State Engineer's Office. Director Gephardt, would you come up to the stand, please? We've heard from your agency the last couple meetings. Is there anything you'd like to add to this? And this is your first time to publicly comment on the written bill. Is there anything you'd like to add on the bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Brandon Gebhardt, Wyoming State Engineer. And I do, first to answer Senator Hicks's question, I am unaware of any authority the Game and Fish has in the permitting of construction of reservoirs. I think that was your question. And then secondly, I've got a couple of potential suggestions for your consideration. The first one relates to the term recreational ponds. We were unable to find anywhere where that is defined in statute. So I think you have a couple of options. If you would like to, you could either define what a recreational pond is, or perhaps tie it back to verbiage in legislation. And my suggestion would be to, rather than call it a recreational pond, call it a recreational reservoir, that, because a reservoir does have a definition. It's defined in 41-3-307. And it's defined as any basin which contains or will contain impounded water. And then it is also implied I believe it's 103. I could be wrong on that, but it implies that that's man-made. Again, it doesn't specifically say man-made, so two suggestions: you could call it a man-made recreational reservoir, or if you felt comfortable just calling it a recreational reservoir, or you could provide a definition of recreational pond. I think would help the administration of it.
Director, let's stay on that one for a minute. So on page 2, under definitions, so I think what David's done here is he recognized there was no definition, so he actually created one.
Okay.
And so are you suggesting that that definition is inadequate, or what?
Maybe,
Help us.
I think my concern with it was that a pond could be a naturally occurring pond, potentially. And so maybe making a man-made recreational pond or reservoir, which does tie back to kind of a broad definition that is used frequently in statute.
Very good. So if we added on page 2, line 7, after means any man-made pond, I'd hate to use the word reservoir because I just don't want this to convolute reservoirs in the way we normally think of reservoirs. But I'd certainly suggest man-made pond would be appropriate. Okay.
Mr. Chairman. Brandon,
Hicks.
a question, if I may, on this is, when I look at this, the definition of recreational pond, I think, is concerning for me, because a pond is a facility, and what the state engineers actually permits is a water right. So, and they also have construction standards for large ponds. So you don't issue a permit necessarily for the pond itself. You issue a water right for the water that's stored in the pond. And here's why I think this is important, because it gets back to the beneficial use statutes that we have and what constitutes beneficial use of water. Recreation is recognized as a beneficial. That is a beneficial use of water. I don't know that adding the word pond in there, I think, conflates that to a certain degree associated with that water right. So I think if we were going to do that, what you would want to say is a water right, because it gets back to using consistent language under our beneficial use component. Go right to your website. What can you permit ponds for, right? Ponds, reservoirs, any of these things, it's for recreational purposes. That is a beneficial use under the guidelines that's on the website with the state engineer's office. So I don't know how you bring that into whether it's a reservoir or a pond or whatever. I guess I come back is it's the pond and the construction is the dam or the abutment or the aperture or the dike or whatever it is the beneficial use of that water is for recreational purposes. And so I'm having a problem with the concept of recreational pond when it's really we're permitting the water right for recreation purposes in a pond. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I believe it does, Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks. The other component to that, though, is our dam safety program. and the construction has to go through our program for that as well. So I don't know if this is convoluted in that sense as well.
Well, so that, that brings up the other question is the half acre to me is arbitrary. So we have to understand the nature of what the problem we're trying to address is. And I'm not so sure this gets to that from a standpoint. The 1 acre, getting back to the safety of dams component, those are facilities over, 15 acre feet of water and a dam height that exceeds, you have the whole matrix of what constitutes a safety of dam. That's why we have the simplified SW4 form for these smaller facilities and stuff. The way this is worded, a half acre in surface doesn't necessarily mean I could have a half acre surface, but have a 25-foot high dam that then's captured by safety of dams, right? Then it's talking about a different component there is the safety of that facility. And so I don't know how that interplays with the beneficial use. And so,
Mr. Chairman, if I
'cause this
may,
again, it talks about construction of dams and modification of dams, and I'm not so sure just saying pond captures all the other statutory provisions that may come into play if that exceeds 20 feet, 20 feet in height or 15 acre feet in capacity. I mean, how would you interpret that as to what constitutes that when you issue a water right? I'm just trying to see how this would actually, the mechanics work.
Go ahead.
so, Mr. Chairman, I think there's two things. One is the water right itself, and then the other is the construction of the facility, both of which fall under our purview. I did have some suggestions to the beneficial use description that I'll bring that up right now and see if that
Let's do
helps
that.
with
Let's-
this conversation.
Senator Hicks, I think we want to focus on his suggestions on how to improve the bill, and then we'll debate it merits as we go a little further into the discussion. Go ahead, Director.
So my other suggestion was tying in some of the language from our recognized beneficial uses. So
Which page?
I'm on second page, line 9, used primarily for recreational purposes. Do we want to consider the other beneficial uses that are typically associated with these types of facilities that include fish propagation, wetlands, and wildlife? And then on line 11, similarly, we're excluding the term beneficial use for, rather than agriculture, I would suggest irrigation, stock, industrial, and municipal or water treatment purposes.
So you'd inject the word stock after agriculture.
I'd replace agricultural with irrigation, and then I would add stock and municipal to that sentence.
Okay. Any other suggestions?
My only other question is when we see these, there's a significant number of them that are smaller than this half acre. But by changing the size of it, that increases the burden on DEQ to do this too. So I don't have an answer on that. I was just making you aware that we're estimating between 50 and 70% of these are less than a half an acre.
So in order to capture what we're trying to do, is that half acre, do we need to make it a quarter acre or what? How could we strengthen the bill to
That, I believe
capture?
that would help, but that also increases the burden on how many of these we're looking
Certainly
at. So
does.
I didn't know what the intent of the body was to how
Very
many it
good.
is, but we do see a significant number smaller than the half acre size.
Very good. So we'll talk to DEQ about that. Thank you. Any other questions for the director? And we'll bring him back before we get done. So we'll let you sit down. Jennifer, would you come up forward, please? Jennifer, it's always a pleasure to have you before our committee. We appreciate your efforts.
Thank you for
The
having me.
last time you testified to us, you indicated that this type of a process to bring it to your agency as the lead would require an extra employees because you couldn't do it with your existing staff. We've added a full-time equivalent employee in here. Would you address that and then any other comments you might have on the bill?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'd be happy to. To start with your first question, yes, to implement a new permitting program as proposed in this bill, we would need a minimum of 1 FTE. It depends on the scope of this permitting program. If this position is, solely focused on permitting and issuing permits, 1 FTE might be possible. However, if we start incorporating compliance and inspection activities, field monitoring work, it's likely that we would need 2 full-time employees to accomplish that work, considering that we will also have rulemaking to do, public notices. I anticipate that we would receive quite a few complaints with this program. I think there's some contentious issues that we would have to work through, and there may also be permit appeals. So again, depending on the scope and the number of reservoirs or ponds that we would be permitting across the state, I think 2 FTE would likely be more appropriate, again, if particularly we are incorporating field monitoring activities. Typically, when we do monitoring activities on ambient waters, we work in two-member crews for safety purposes as well.
Carry on.
Thank you. So, I'll talk high level about some of the thoughts that we have on this bill. And we do absolutely appreciate being part of the past conversations and having the opportunity to provide feedback today. And we do recognize that in parts of the state, the construction of these ponds are causing water quality concerns. However, we do feel that we have the regulatory and non-regulatory programs in place to address those water quality concerns. And a brief recap of the programs that we do have would be the Section 140 certifications of the Army Corps 404 permits. And that's where we make sure that the construction activities for dredge and fill permits meet state water quality standards. So we can require erosion control, we can require revegetation activities, other mitigation measures to make sure that the construction of the pond is not degrading water quality. We also have our point source discharge permitting program, the WIPDES program. That's where we can require permits for discharge of pollutants into surface waters. These are probably less common with ponds, but if the concern is adding algicides or toxic chemicals to a pond, we already have measures in place under the WIPDES program to address those concerns. Our non-point source program, also called the 319 grant program, also comes into play here. This is where we work with private property owners through conservation districts and other entities to promote best practices to address pollutants from land runoff. So things like E. coli, nutrients we can address through recommending riparian buffers, reduced nutrient or fertilizer application, best practices like that we approach as a state through voluntary measures rather than a regulatory approach. And then last but not least, we have a suite of Clean Water Act programs where when we have concerns about whether a water body is impaired, we can do monitoring studies, assess that water body, and then write plans, whether they're watershed-based plans or TMDLs, to look at the sources and come up with ways to mitigate those sources, whether that's through permits or voluntary measures. So we are not opposed to taking on a new permitting program if that's the direction of the legislature. However, we are having a hard time envisioning what standards and specifications we would codify into rules to make sure we're developing the right solutions to address the problems that we've heard from our communities with these ponds. If we did issue these permits, they would be issued under our water and wastewater section. Under the Environmental Quality Act, we are charged with issuing permits to construct, install, or modify facilities capable of causing or contributing to pollution. We do again caution that if we refer to recreational ponds as facilities capable of causing or contributing to pollution, it could open the door to regulation on other types of ponds that are beyond the scope of what this bill is envisioning. Agricultural ponds is an example, and also stormwater ponds. Typically, when we issue permits to construct, we're talking about sewage lagoons or off-channel pits that are holding wastewater. And so we have specifications related to liners or aerators, engineering practices like that to make sure that we're protecting public health and the environment. We have considered what kind of specifications we could codify into rules if we do adopt this permitting program. Again, for things like nutrients and E. coli, we again would recommend best practices through a voluntary approach. I think the committee should carefully consider implications of codifying things like that we've in the past addressed through a voluntary program. To address factors like temperature, we could look at things like pond dimensions or requirements of where the water is drawn down from the pond. But those are pretty site-specific, and contemplating a statewide set of standards for all ponds could be difficult. And again, may point back to that local government regulations or practices may be the best approach here to make sure we're developing standards that are appropriate for different parts of the state. I'll stop there. Those are our major concerns. And again, we're not opposed to taking on a new permitting program. We do understand the water quality concerns, but we do want to make sure we're developing the right solutions without creating overreach within our programs. Again, we would continue to advocate that the committee consider whether this is a better tool for local planning agencies. And I'll stand for questions, but I'd be happy to walk through specific sections of the bill and provide further comments if you'd like me to.
Thank you, Jennifer. So committee, one second. I'm sensitive to the fact that I've brought you a bill on the last day for the first time for you to look through. Based on our expert witnesses, it's apparent that there's some challenges, and this is going to require a lot of more work to really address the issue without having unintended consequences. And so I think what we'll do is we'll entertain a motion to postpone this bill, but I'd really like to hear from the committee members about what other approaches would you like to experience and see in a proposed bill? What do we need to address on a bigger scale? So I'd look forward to that. Let's go first to public comment, and Jennifer, we'll likely bring you back also, but let's open this up to public comment, and then we'll go back to our agencies and have a little discussion of how we can strengthen this, recognizing that we may not be able to accomplish it today. So if you'll hold, Director Gephardt, I'm gonna open the floor for input. Is there anyone in the public that would like to address this issue? Kaylee, no one online? Okay, so members, let's just have a free and open dialogue here. Representative or Senator Hicks, tell us what you think would strengthen this bill. What do we need to do to accomplish?
So, Mr. Chairman,
objective?
if I could have Jennifer come back up, because I think she's already proposed a solution to part of the problem through the department. I think we all recognize there's an issue out there. And it's going to be a growing issue as the state continues to increase in population, and we see subdivisions of land, or as my friend in Nevada would call them, dustets, because after they put 5 horses and a cow out there, that's the only thing that comes off of those properties anymore. So ranchettes. But anyway, we understand the nature of the problem, but I think also we have to understand the nature of what's the best mechanism to get to that. And I've had the opportunity in my career to work closely with Jennifer in her other capacities and some of her predecessors through the 319 program. And there's sufficient funding out there, and I think she referenced BMPs and the way to do this thing. Because the very nature of the issue that we're dealing here is a non-point source pollution. It's not like you can just go out there and fix it. And so I think it puts the department in a tremendously impossible position to go out and say, on every single pond, that this is going to create a water quality problem downstream. One facility, and they would have to make that determination on every single facility. And under the current EQC guidelines, every one of those appealable back to the Environmental Quality Board. And so I think that becomes problematic from a standpoint of just administration. And then I look in the context of Wyoming water law. Even if we bring in, so I had already looked up some of the beneficial uses that may be in the context of recreation. I have the same list that you had, state engineer. But even under the context of Wyoming water law, I think that even if we added those, there's still problems associated with that from a standpoint of, and as somebody that has permitted a lot of these facilities, it's oftentimes we have multiple different beneficial uses in one facility. So we'll have wetlands, recreation, fish propagation, and stock water. And I permitted those through the state engineer's office for all 4 of those uses. And so how do you determine what's the primary use on that? And so here's the other issue that I see that would have to be addressed at some point in time under Wyoming water laws. I can go in here and change a beneficial use from a recreational pond to a stock pond, and nothing would preclude a landowner. And so then we get into the whole compliance issue. Who's going to check that when there's a change of use on a pond? Who's going to check at what point in time does it become an aggregate component to create an impairment? I really think, and I think if we look at the history of Wyoming, I would say one of the best programs that we've ever done statewide, and we can show success story after success story after success story, is the non-point source pollution program that DEQ has administered and done a very good job for a long time. And what I see this doing, and where we should head with this, is specifically start through EQC or some other mechanism to develop best management practices for these issues. You know, a lot of these would be the nature of the surface agent. If we're looking at thermal impacts, that could be addressed just by how many surface acres. You want a deeper pond with a smaller surface. That starts to address that versus a shallow pond. That's the best management practice if you're going to do recreational type of ponds. Conversely, even things like vegetative plantings, willows, trees that shade that pond could be a best management practice to reduce those thermal impacts. We do this all the time on stream restoration projects around the state of Wyoming that have been taken off the 303D list of impaired streams, because I've got one in my neighborhood that we're delisting right now, and part of it was thermal impacts. But there is bioengineering techniques that can do all this through best management practices. And the other reason I think this program has been so successful, it's primarily targeted at private lands and it's voluntary, and they provide financial incentives to do these things too. And so I think that if I could say this is where we would want to go with this, Mr. Chairman, I would say, provide some direction. It would be to go back to and I don't know, I'd have to ask Jennifer if the 319 task force is still in place. This should be brought to them and say, what do we need to do to start looking at best management practices, voluntary, and then conservation districts or other entities can apply for funds to help cost share on those best management practices for those landowners that want to participate. But to me, I think that's the best approach, and it's an approach that's worked well for Wyoming in the past. Again, I think we recognize there's a real issue here. But I would rather start with the voluntary approach and the educational approach and dangle the carrot before we hammer them with the hammer of regulation. That's just my thoughts, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hicks. It makes sense. Other committee members, would you like to share any thoughts?
I guess a question I would ask somebody, are the conservation districts or local governments prepared to take this on? As was just suggested, I guess I'm wondering, or does that get dumped into the DEQ plate as well? That's all I've got.
Representative Eklund, we had testimony in Star Valley from Teton County, and they took it in lieu of the state rules. They did pass their own regulations, planning and zoning issues, and they've managed it. Although painful, I think the number of ponds they have in Teton County, the regulations came a little way too late to manage it. But Jennifer, you're suggesting that that is a viable way to do it, is on a local basis through a planning and zoning. They can effectively do this similar thing to what you can do.
Mr. Chairman, yes, I would agree with that. I have reviewed Teton County's land development regulations where they have addressed this issue, and I, again, would advocate that that's best suited for county decisions on whether or not they want to establish those types of local regulations. I'm not aware of other counties who have done the same. Right now, Teton County is the only one that I'm aware of. I think other county governments could take that on if they so choose to. But currently with the non-point source program, we are ready to work with all of the conservation districts and/or county governments out there on this issue. So if that helps address the question, we do have the program and tools in place to work with the conservation districts and other entities on the voluntary programs that were described by Senator Hicks. Otherwise, again, if the question is, are counties prepared for some kind of delegated authority program as contemplated in this bill, I would say most are not, and it would require some capacity development to help them build those programs if they so chose to.
Very good. Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, I'd entertain a motion on this bill. Senator Hicks, go ahead and give us a motion.
Mr. Chairman, and I don't want to belay this because I do think this is an issue and I do think that we need to address it, and I do think the non-point task force is to do that. But again, I wish we had more time to work this issue. It might be something that we take up in the interim as the Select Water Committee to follow up. I think that's something we would want to go ahead and capture for the next interim. David, if we can just put a list together and put this on there as to continue this discussion and look at voluntary programs like the non-point source. But Mr. Chairman, I would move at this point in time to lay this bill back indefinitely.
We have a motion on the table. Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded to lay the bill back. All in favor, please indicate by raise the right hand. All opposed, please raise your hand. Very good. Motion passes. Thank you, Jennifer, and
Thank you.
Director Gephardt. Thank you very much for your efforts on this bill. We recognize as legislators, we have these ideas and we throw them at you folks, and you have to deal with them one way or another, good, bad, or ugly. And we sure appreciate you taking the time out of your schedules to coach us, because we really do value your input. Very good. Let's move on to the next bill. So 1 year ago, this committee saw an opportunity to use ARPA funds to advance water and wastewater projects. And we started off with $95 million is where we recommended to go. And as you recall, in the legislative process, it was changed and manipulated, ended up at 50 million. And that program was propagated by our OSLI, Office of State Lands and Investments, and they did an incredible job writing the rules, promulgating everything and bringing it forward and letting the projects out. We're so pleased with what they've done. The only question is, there were sure a lot of projects left on the table. And so this committee in our last meeting decided that we'd like to appropriate $35 million more out of the ARPA funds to give to this program, and encouraged the agency then just to go down further on the list and grab more projects and not have to do a ton of more work and application work. So that's where we're at. Beth, thank you for coming to address us today. We'd like to know if our idea works for you and how you might handle that, and give us some advice of, is 35 million the right feel-good number for you?
Mr. Chairman, Beth Blackwell, the Grants and Loans Manager for the Office of State Lands and Investments. I did a little analysis before coming to this meeting. I'll start from the beginning just so everyone has the full picture of what we received. We received 113 applications totaling over $225 million. At an October 27th SLIB meeting, we were able to fund 27 applications totaling $50 million. The board method of applying or awarding funds were, we only awarded funds to entities. Let me back up. For entities that submitted more than one application, we only considered their first priority to even the playing field for those entities that only submitted one application. We then went and looked at the scoring that that was created in the rules, and each application received a score. We went down the list from, I believe the highest was 23, actually 22, and then the lowest we received was, I believe, a 3 or nope, a 0. So projects were ranked by that scoring system. The board went down the list from highest ranked to lowest ranked. They were able to fund all applications ranked 16 and above, except for one request from the city of Cheyenne in the amount of $1.9 million for a sewer interceptor project. Remaining first priority applications following the October meeting was 39 applications totaling $79 million. And that was only first priority applications and those applications that were submitted, the one application submitted by entities, not priority twos or anything else. If the 35 million were to be added to the program and using the same methodology the board used, we would be able to fully fund 21 more applications for $34 million and partially fund a $5.3 million request from the city of Rock Springs with $1,048,301, leaving 17 applications or entities that did not receive any funding totaling $44 million.
So, Mr. Chairman.
Hold on a second. I want to make sure that we've digested what, so the 30, if we appropriate 35 more million, you can go down and pick up 21 more projects.
Correct, and partially fund a 22nd one.
22nd. And if, that still leaves at least 17 projects unfunded.
Entities that had not received funding.
Okay. Very good. Senator
Mr.
Hicks?
Chairman, just for clarifications, those were all #1 ranked priorities. So how far would, so we didn't even get through the #1 ranked priorities with this.
These were, so the projects were ranked
Yeah.
26 points down, and we went down through into the 15s?
We funded
16s?
all through 16 with the exception of the city of Cheyenne's water or sewer interceptor project, which was a $1.9 million request. How we organized the list was first sorted by the rankings, so ranking took top choice. Then we went, within those rankings, we went smallest to largest projects with the thought of we can provide more funding to more applications if we start with the smallest applications. We were just trying to make sure we could get the money spread across as many entities as possible, and we felt like this was the most fair cards on the table approach.
Very
So
good.
what would be the total number? I mean, 35 million is an arbitrary number. So what would it take to fully fund those 21 more applications?
We would need approximately $79 million to fund the remaining first priority and single applications that are remaining on the list.
So let's talk about the budget, folks. There was $71 million that we left in a special savings account to protect. 71 million of ARPA money left over. The governor has, I forgot the number, was it 24 million uncommitted? But we have to recognize that the governor has already given us a list of all the things he desires to spend there. And so, and there's the paralleling application process, water and sewer. There's another Health and Human Services that's exactly in the same boat of many, many applications that are unfunded. Go ahead,
Mr.
Beth.
Chairman, the other the other question on the table is we haven't opened the local government program. That program is another $49 million for any type of eligible ARPA program that is being done by a municipality. Within that allotment, within the footnote, it states that water and sewer projects take a lower priority for that pot of money, but they are eligible to apply for that. There is, I believe, 5 or 6 applicants that applied for the water and sewer project that didn't have the required match funding in place. Therefore, they will be applying for the local government pot of funds. Additionally, we will allow applications that are on the water and sewer list to move their applications over to the local government pot to be considered there as well. We're trying to provide every opportunity we can to get these projects funded. We just don't know how many of the water and sewer applications are going to move over to the local government, and then at the end of the day, how many will actually get funded there.
So, Mr. Chairman, so whatever money we appropriate, I want to understand, you're not going to go out and take any new applications. You will just fund those that were already ranked and already in place.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, that's my understanding, and that was the desire of the electeds.
Okay, back to my original question. You said that it would fund 21 more applications plus part of the project in Rock Springs. My question is, what would it take to fund, instead of 35 million, it's obviously a little more than that. What is that number to fully fund 22 projects?
22 projects, it would
Instead
be.
of 21 and a half or whatever that percentage is.
It would be approximately $39.3 million, $38.3 million. Because the 28.3, the request is $5.3 million. We would have a remaining approximately 1 million to apply to that, so we would still need approximately 4.3. Add the 4.3 to the 35 million, you get 39.3.
Mr. Chairman, if we're going to cut it off someplace, I'd rather cut it off as a whole project instead of a partial project.
That's fine. Any other advice for us, Beth?
Unfortunately, I don't have any other advice. I'm just here to answer questions and do what I'm told.
Yeah, I was setting you up with that, didn't I? Sorry, I know that's your role. Committee members, what are your thoughts?
Move the bill.
Okay, hold. Yeah, I want to go to public comment before we, I was just interested in if we had any more discussion with our agencies, sorry. Okay, very good. Thanks, ladies, and thanks for hustling over. We know we missed our time slot with you. Appreciate you coming. Is there any public input on this bill? Anyone in the audience would like to come forward? Seeing none. Kaylee, do we have anyone online? We have no one online? Okay, now I think I'm ready for a motion. Senator Hicks?
Mr. Chairman, I'm wondering why you're asking me for a motion.
Well, because you already made it, so I was going back to you.
I said I'd move the bill.
There you go. Move the bill. And
Second.
It's been moved and seconded, so let's discuss it now. Is there any, first of all, is there any amendments or any?
Mr. Chairman, I would offer amendment to raise the appropriation to $39.3 million.
Do I hear a second? It's been moved and seconded that we move the dollar amount on page. Oh, here we go. Page 3, line 1, line 2, we'd increase that
By 4.3.
by 4.3 million.
So 89.3 million.
89.3 million is what my math does too. Okay, we have a motion to amend the bill to increase it to, so it'd be an additional $39.3 million. Any discussion? Online, gentlemen, anybody have any thoughts there? Nope. Okay. All in favor, please indicate by the raise of the right hand. Any opposed, raise their hand. Appears to be unanimous. Do we have any more discussion on the bill before we vote?
Call for the question.
Very good. Kaylee, would you do a roll call vote for us?
Mr. Chairman, this is a roll call for 23 LSO 0328, eligible water and sewer projects as amended. Senator Boner? Senator Driscoll?
Aye.
Senator French?
Aye.
Senator Grew is excused. Senator Steinmetz? Aye. Representative Banks is excused. Representative Eklund?
Aye.
Representative Larson?
Aye.
Representative Nyman is excused. Representative Paxton? Chairman Simpson?
Aye.
Vice Chairman Hicks?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, one request, Beth. Could you get us those numbers, the number of projects, what the total amount was? And get us a description, because we're gonna need that to present the, these will go to the Joint Ag Committee. And so they're gonna need that information to present at the committee meetings and then on the floor. So if you can get that memo prepared and just say this is how many, what the request was, 225 million total, and then a description of the ranking process and how you did that, because we'll need that information.
Absolutely. Would you like the list of applications in the ranking order in addition to that memo, or just the memo?
And the applications too.
Okay.
I think that'll be very beneficial.
Happy to do it.
Thank you.
Committee, I'd propose we send this bill to the Senate. That'd be all right? Have you started? Make a Senate file? Okay, we've reached the end of our agenda. As your chairman, I'd like to tell you that it has been a great honor and a privilege for me to chair you this last 2 weeks. I will miss my association with this committee tremendously. Thanks to all of you in the audience that has been such a good support to me and to our committee. We very much appreciate all of you. With that, I'll
Mr. Chairman, the honor and the privilege has been ours. I just gotta say, in 12 years that I've been in the legislature, I've served with a lot of different members of the legislature over the year, a lot of different committee members. And you are a valuable asset to the state of Wyoming. And I appreciate, and I know the committee appreciates, working with you with your leadership and your decorum and the way you presented yourself. So again, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. It's indeed been my honor. Thank you very much. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. So moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, thanks, everyone. Meeting's adjourned.